Thank you for joining us this evening for the May 24th, 2022 Monte Sereno Joint City Council and Site and Architectural Commission special meeting. Before this meeting is called to order, Before this meeting is called to order, I would like to point out a few house rules to assist council members and commissioners, staff, and members of the public to successfully participate in this meeting. Council members, your microphone is live, so please keep your microphones on mute until you wish to speak. For tonight's meeting, we're using Zoom to host the City Council and Site and Architectural Commission joint special meeting. At the bottom of the Zoom client, there are two icons, chat and raise hand. Please use chat only to report technical issues such as being unable to hear a council member or commissioner speaking. Please use raise hand to be recognized by the mayor and enabled to speak to the council or commission. To comment under oral communication or on any agenda item, we are allowed 3 minutes to speak per agenda item. Emails limited to 350 words can also be submitted to the city clerk and it will be read into the record. This word limit is set to adhere to the typical 3-minute time allowance. Only attendees using the Zoom application can use the raise hand option to comment. Participants calling in from a telephone will only be able to listen and cannot provide feedback or public comment. Lastly, because we are all in the same room, all votes at this meeting will be taken by roll call.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome the Site and Architect Commissioners for being here. It's an extra meeting for all of us. So thank you for getting to participate in this important discussion we are to have today. With that, I'd ask, I'll call the meeting to order and ask Mayor Pro Tem Mekachek to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Do we have any oral communications?
Mayor, let me take the roll call first.
Oh yes, please go ahead.
Okay, Councilmember Lawler.
Present.
Councilmember Leuthold.
Present.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mekachek.
Present.
Mayor Elahi.
Present.
Commissioner Zeidler.
Here.
Commissioner Sharma.
Here.
Commissioner Booker.
Here.
Commissioner Balasubramanian.
Present.
And Chair White.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go to the next item, which is the orders of the day. Does anybody want to change anything in the orders of the day? If not, we'll go to the next item, which is oral communication. Do we have any oral communication?
We do have our hand raised, but I'm not sure if that is for oral communication or not. Sherry, I will give permission to speak.
Also, you have the timer going on for 3 minutes? Hopefully.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. All right, so we have Sherry to speak. Please go ahead. This is on any matter that's not on the agenda, so we have a limited agenda. Sherry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay. I am resident on Bicknell Road, and I'm just here to listen to the meeting that might affect my property.
Okay, so what we can do is when we get to that thing,
if I misappropriated,
yeah, Sherry?
trying to speak at this point, I apologize.
Yeah, Sherry, I'm sorry, but you're breaking up. And you since that is on the agenda, when that matter comes up, please go ahead and participate at that time, and we'll call upon you. Just make sure you raise your hands up, and also check your connection. It's not coming in very clearly. Is there any member of the public want to speak on any matter that's not on the agenda?
We don't have any other raised hands.
Yes, I'm raising my hand.
Oh yeah, member of the public. All right, go ahead, Ryan.
I would just like everyone to know that there was an accident on Dave's Avenue on Saturday evening in the S-turn, and I believe you'll be hearing about it in the future. I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing that. Are there any written communication? And this is the time for any member of the public if they want to discuss any item.
All written communications have been forwarded to the council and commission, and I have not received any new ones since.
Was there one matter that was added later on to the agenda?
There is, but from what I understand, that was going to be done during the public comment section of agenda item 2,
okay.
I believe.
All right, let's see how that comes up. So let's go ahead and get started with the new business, which has to do with the first item is the housing element. I understand this is a staff recommendation that we discuss this and give them feedback. So if you can have a staff report on that, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and commissioners. I am Diana Perkins, the city planner. We are in the process of updating the city's housing element as required by the state of California. One of the major components of the housing element is the sites inventory, which is the plan on how the city will accommodate the additional 193 housing units that we are required to plan for during this upcoming 8-year period. The additional housing units can be accessory dwelling units, additional units accommodated through rezoning of properties, or additional units constructed under the Sb9 regulations. So first, for the accessory dwelling units, as detailed in the staff report, the projection for these units is a little bit different than other sites. This would be based on the actual number of building permits that have been issued in the past few years for ADUs. So with the formula provided by HCD, staff anticipates that we can plan for a minimum of 117 ADUs to be included in the projections for the updated housing element. Secondly, the city can also rezone property to allow for a reduced lot size to encourage construction of additional housing units. Staff has identified 9 parcels along Vineland Avenue and 13 along Bicknell Road that could be considered for rezoning from the current 1 acre lot size to a ½ acre. If the property owners in these areas were interested in such a rezone and the possibility of splitting their lot, this would be another method where we could account for additional housing units in the updated housing element. And lastly, additional housing units can be constructed if property owners decide to use the Sb9 laws to split their lot or construct additional housing units, or a combination of both. And while we have had interest from property owners in constructing additional housing units under the Sb9 requirements, the feedback that we have received is that such projects are not feasible with the current regulations. And therefore, modifying the Sb9 requirements is another option that we have to achieve the required 193 units that we need to plan for. Also included in the staff report, in addition to the discussion about the sites, is a milestone schedule for completing the draft housing element. So the draft element is an opportunity for the city to provide information to the state on what we're planning, kind of where we're at right now. And then we can get feedback from the state on those programs or those sites before finalizing the document at the end of this year. So for tonight's meeting, staff recommends that the commission and council provide feedback and direction on the site's inventory. And then that information will be included in the draft housing element. This completes the staff report. I'm here and happy to answer any questions, as well as Andy Flower is here from EMC Planning, who is the city's consultant on this project.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Staff did a lot of work putting this together. I appreciate that. It's a complicated process to go through. And there's some recusal issues. So at this time, general questions that anybody has of the staff, we can get into that without any specific lots, because there are recusal issues as to some people are within the 1,000-foot zone. And I think our attorney, Mr. Rudin, had sent out emails to everybody, or at least the concerned members. So if you can just, any specific questions you have of staff for the entire report, please go ahead and ask those at this time. Do you have any questions by any of the council members or commissioners? Yeah, Councilmember Lawler, please go ahead. And
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. Since we are exceeding, it seems like we're exceeding the ADU requirement. So will that count as our buffer?
You're on mute, Ms. Perkins.
Sorry about that. I turned the video on. I forgot to turn the mute off. Sorry. For the ADUs, we're projecting that we could reasonably account for at least 117 of the 193 units that we need to plan for total. And then the buffer would be on top of that. The state, I do believe, recommends a buffer of 20 to 30%. That may be a little high for us in Monte Sereno, but that is sort of another decision to be made, is how much of a buffer we would like to include.
Okay, and one just follow-up question. Did we have a buffer last time? Do you know?
I might defer to Andy on that. I do not believe we had a buffer.
Buffers are a new part of the discussion. So it's, and it sounds like a hassle until you learn about the necessity of it and the idea that it's actually a city's friend to have a buffer, because during the mid-cycle, there will be an adjustment to discover whether or not you continue to retain the capacity necessary for the RHNA numbers. And if, and according to the affordability levels that we'll be assigning each of these sites. So if during a mid-cycle analysis, it's found that you no longer meet that capacity, you have the buffer to lean back on. Without the buffer, it would mean a mid-cycle revision, which could be very costly. It could be akin to basically the 4-year, the penalty that they used to give for being late, which is taking you down to a 4-year cycle rather than an 8-year cycle. So de facto, it sort of is similar in practice. So the buffer helps mitigate for that.
Okay, thank you.
And I will also mention the buffer is useful in terms of compliance with no net loss law. Now, typically that is something that is more of a concern when you have large multifamily districts, because a developer, even if a property is zoned to say allow for multiple units, may simply propose 1 unit or fewer units than what it's zoned for. And so if you are losing units that you had accounted for in your housing element on a particular site that you've identified as being sufficient to produce a significant quantity of units, that imposes a requirement on the city to upzone or make available other sites in the city to account for those lost units. So typically you can't deny a project just because it proposes fewer units than you had assumed in your housing element. And so if you don't have a buffer, that may ultimately get you in trouble down the line. Now, given that most of the city is single family zoning, that is a little less likely to be a significant risk, but it's still at least some risk, particularly if we're relying on, say, Sb9, for the creation of urban lot splits to account for some of the RHNA.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Councilmember Turner, please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment on the buffer. Many of the cities have indicated that they will not use a 30% buffer, because the problem with using a buffer that is so high is that HCD will not consider the buffer, the residents in that buffer for the 7th cycle, should we need, and I'm sure we're going to have the 7th cycle. So I would like to consider using a lower percentage, maybe 10 or 15%, and we can talk about that, as we move along. The second comment I want to make is I want to ask if our planner and our staff are aware of the changes, the new changes that we have at the housing element process. If you look at it, they have two requirements. One is public participation requirement, that you are supposed to make a draft available for public comment for 30 days. And the second one is the transparency requirement. For any subsequent revision, the local government, which is Monte Sereno, must post the draft revision on its website and an email link to all individuals and organizations that have previously requested notices. So I'd like to emphasize that, as we're announcing our meetings to the public, that we say this is site and architecture meeting and council meeting for the housing element. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members or commissioners? All right, so we're basically on the staff report, we can discuss ADUs as specifically as necessary. The recusal issue comes up when we start discussing particular zoning issues or the Mineland and the Bicknell properties. Anyone else have any general questions on ADUs or anything else like that? If not, are there any members of the, I guess I can go to the public. Are there any members of the public who have raised their hands and have any questions on the ADU issues?
There are two hands, Eric Ramakrishnan, B. Walsh, and Skip Pearson. I could start with Eric first.
All right. You can have the timer up also. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I know that I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself and jumping to the next item, but I think that it's germane to this item too. I really want to compliment the hard work that staff did on the proposals around SB9. I am quite pleased with the result that came out of that. And I think that's germane to this conversation because, as has been pointed out to you and as was mentioned in the staff report, right now the city still comes up 53 units short in meeting RHNA targets as planned. And if there were a buffer included as recommended by HCD, it's closer to 100 units. I understand that there are some people in the community who have suggested, well, we can just, the city of Monte Sereno could just make that up by going around and counting things like pool houses that might qualify as ADUs. If the intent of that is to count pool houses that already exist, that's a little difficult because you can only count units towards your RHNA targets at the time building permits are pulled, so existing units won't count. If the intent is to hope that people will come forward and agree to voluntarily turn their pool houses into affordable housing, I'm not sure that that's likely to happen, and in any case that is really not consistent with the guidance that HCD has given for counting ADUs. So I think the best bet to moving forward is to rely on SB9. And again, I just really want to thank staff for their hard work on that. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Yes, let me, Ms. B. Walsh.
There you go. Yeah, I just really quick on that one. I have a few other questions on the future ones, but the affordability factor that Andy mentioned, if you could explain that and how that ties into this, because I think we're trying to play rules, but none of these ADUs are going to be affordable. So go ahead, I'm done.
Okay. And anybody else on the public that just to address the city?
Yes, Skip Pearson.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Skip Pearson. I have a question. I read the what I could about the RHNA regulations, and they specifically are talking about not just making more units available, but low and lower income units available. And I interpret that to mean, and I'd like the city attorney's response to mean that an accessory dwelling unit could satisfy one of the income ranges, but a mini accessory dwelling unit, could that satisfy the lower income unit requirements the state is looking for? That's all.
Staff will be able to address that. Do we have anybody else who's raised their hand?
Yes, Atif.
Okay. Atif, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for giving the opportunity. I'm from Zara Construction Group, where we are working on ADU affordability. So we are actually coming up with two brands. One is just keeping affordability in mind, and the other brand where affordability is not an issue. So in our first brand, we have changed the building envelope from traditional construction. We are going to the SIPs, which is structural insulated panel system. And the other envelope we are using for where affordability is not an issue, which will be aluminum post and beams model. So one is kind of little more fancier, have more feature, and the other one have more affordability, but both have very good aesthetics. So please, I will pause myself. If you have any question, please ask.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about this? What are the costs of these units?
So the affordability one, we have a starting from 250. And if a client is keep adding the options and it keep going up. So the basic model starting from 250,000. And the other one where affordability is not an issue is all stylish, all pivot doors and wider windows. So those are starting from $350,000.
And how big is the size of these units?
So good question. So we are coming up with two sizes. One is 16 by 40, which is almost 600 plus square feet. And the other one is we are trying to meet the maximum square footage allowed, almost like 1,200.
Thank you for answering.
And we are a prefabricated factory. We are just put in Napa, American Canyon. So our unit, we can start to finish less than 30 days. So because we bypass all subcontractors and everyone, we have like everything in-house, right? We just go for inspection and approvals and that's about it.
Okay, is there anything else you want to add? Thank you. Anybody else on the member of public who wants to address the council?
We have Sarah.
Sarah, please go ahead.
Yeah. I have two sides of the question. The first question is where these extra units gonna be built. What it is, I lived in Monte Sereno over 20 years. My husband and I emptied our pockets, millions of dollars, to be able to live in a secluded area with not 100 million people coming from God knows where to live around us. When you bring in low-income people, you bring in with it crimes. And on top of it, we have not received a single. I've been a resident of Monte Sereno on Quito over 20 years. All these programs you're doing, we have not received a single word or a single letter. I just received something yesterday that the approval, you did not ask us should we build or not. If you did, we would have said no. We paid millions of dollars, emptied our pockets to be in an exclusive area. This is going to turn worse than downtown San Jose with crimes. You bring in, there's nothing called 250,000 in Los Gatos. Are you bringing us people off the street to come and rob our houses? Daily on my computer, the next door, there are robberies 24/7. We never had this problem before. You bring in criminals in our community, and we're the founders of the community. How come we never heard of the program? We should have said no. Nobody opened their mouth from the city of Monte Sereno. It's pathetic. My property is going to go down the hill because you're allowing that. I already have 2 neighbors with eyesores, with buildings blocking all the trees. It's called Monte Sereno, the Serene Mountains. You're supposed to protect the greenery. You want to build? Go somewhere else in a cheaper area where you could find more room, but leave us alone. So where are these going to build? It's not going to be around the corner from my house. I paid an arm and leg, and I'm still paying on that to be an exclusive area. And now it's going to turn into a dump area. And I am 72 years old. My time limit and work is finished. And how come the city never opened their mouth? We haven't heard a word. You guys want to help a builder? You want to help a poor guy to come in an exclusive area? Well, maybe you should take him to Atherton and bring the property lower in price over there, because Atherton is the highest property in the whole USA. Our property used to be worth much more, and now they're worthless. At 70.
Sarah, thank you. Your time is up. Appreciate your comments. I understand your frustration. The city has been very active, and we're trying to deal with a state law that's forcing all of us to do something. So we're all here to try to find a solution that doesn't change the lifestyle of Monte Sereno. We would like to preserve the city as it is. Are there any other members of the public who have any comments?
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to council and commissioners for discussion. Who would like to go first on any comments you guys may have? And we're still talking just about ADUs at this point, not necessarily on the zoning issues. All right, I guess you guys all have also said your piece. Let me just give a general overview of how I'm looking at this process, if you guys don't mind. If you can put up with me for a couple of minutes. This whole process of requiring us to do something with, as you heard from Sarah, is being mandated by the state. It appears that the state thinks that city councils either have too much to do or not enough, or that members of local bodies lack the wisdom to do what is in the best interest of the city, or perhaps have too much intelligence to handle matters. So they have formulated a plan designed to make it easy for city councils to handle difficult matters related to the development of the cities and what is in the best interest of its citizens. It appears that the state believes that it knows best, and it wants to provide us with the brainless options so that cities can deal without any fuss, and housing can be provided in a manner that is supposedly equitable and fair. So they proposed a one-size-fits-all remedy. The goal of RENA is to ensure that cities provide adequate housing across all income spectrums as the population of a city grows. So, this is kind of ironic because Monte Sereno has actually lost population. It had its peak population in 2000 of 3,487 residents, at which time it was the 5,420th largest city in the US. And now in 2020, it had 3,427 residents, which means it became the 5,826th largest city. So we've actually lost residents. So we do not have a need to build more housing to serve our own population. But the state in its wisdom and its city requires us to build 193 units over the next 8 years. The state calls it a regional plan. It's called RHNA, RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, designed to satisfy the entire region. Obviously, the city of Monte Sereno does not require housing, but if you grant that the state does and maybe the region does, the solution would have been to propose a regional plan, which would mean that it would not have been restricted for each city to be trying to build houses that they don't need, but have like the entire city of Santa Clara County work together, and cities could have joined hands. The city that had land would provide the land, and the city that could finance it could provide some funding. So that way everybody would have housing, and affordable housing could be built where it could be easily built rather than being forced down a city where there is not enough land to do so. But anyway, we have sworn an allegiance to the Constitution. We pledged to the flag and to the state of California, and we are required to do something. So it's a good thing we're all here, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a solution that will keep the Monte Sereno as it is, but also provide the housing that may be helpful. So the ADUs were a good step to start, and I appreciate the ADU report. I did notice when I'm looking at the ADU report that in the first 4 months of this year, we've actually built eight houses, or 8 ADUs have been permitted. And the question is, how do you average that out? If you average it over the last 3 or 4 years, then you come up with 117 number projected over the next 8 years. However, if you just look at the number for this year, which is 8 in just 4 months, or in 1/3 of the year you built 8, which means you can build 24 ADUs in a year. If you stretch that out over 8 years, we would be at 192, which means we're there. We don't have to do anything else. Just make sure we can get our ADUs built. The HCD guidelines seem to say that you should be averaging it out, but they also provide, if you look at their guidelines, that if you want to use a different number, as long as you can justify it, then you can do that. And for us to be able to satisfy our requirements for ADU, we would have to provide some incentives for ADU buildings. We would have to, and the incentives could be as simple as figuring out a discount for affordable housing. They could mean providing templates for building houses, providing them with contracts so they could get housing that can be built. I mean, some of these ADUs now cost $1 million. We heard from somebody today that has a proposal to get them built for $250,000 or somewhere around there. So I think if we can really put together a good incentive for ADU so that we can do the 24 ADUs a year, we would satisfy the HCD requirements, and we would also be serving the purpose of building affordable housing. And this affordable housing isn't necessarily the housing that would threaten anybody else. I mean, this would be housing for some of our relatives. It could be housing for teachers and other individuals that serve the city of Monte Sereno or neighborhoods here. So I would suggest we consider that seriously and see if we can move in that direction. And I'd ask the staff to see if they can look at really doing a deep dive in these numbers and see if a projection of a 24 unit number is appropriate. Those are my comments. I appreciate you guys listening to me on that. And if anybody else would like to make some comments, please go ahead. Yeah, Council Member Luthor, please go ahead.
Thank you. I actually had very similar comments that I wanted to make, echoing your comments. So I'm going to go ahead and echo those because I agree completely that our ADU production last cycle caused us to greatly exceed our numbers. One of the very few cities in the state of California that met and exceeded our numbers for this current housing cycle, and ADUs were a major part of that. We all live here. We know the characteristics of our town, and we know what works for people. We know people like the ADUs. We all know people who are either moving from their primary homes into their ADUs as they go into their retirement income, and then their houses become available to their children. And we're talking about ways that people can stay in their homes, or their houses could even become available for rentals to support them. But when a single person or a couple older is on a fixed income, the ADU is very viable. Also, if they have younger family members people from out of the area, or if they want to make that ADU available to local people who desire to live near their work, for our teachers and others, as well as the service personnel that HCD has made a big issue, that we have many people in the service industries who serve the residents of Monte Sereno, from people who service pools to maid service people and others who come into the community, who it would be more ideal if people could live closer to where these services are being provided to people. So it also, the affordability was raised by at least one of the comments. A lot of the affordability, we do really fit the very low income. When a senior who is living on Social Security is in an ADU, that is considered a very low income. So we're actually looking to how that ADU is being used to classify them. Now, HCD has said that there are formulas as to how many the proposed ADUs will fall in which area. That's for when we're counting them in advance. But I think when they come in real life, we're going to be able to sort them. Staff keeps track of the intended uses and if they're going to be rented, the intended rents. So that's an area that I think we will meet and exceed. And so I think as it relates to this question of ADUs, just like the mayor said, I'm also feeling that we are going to overperform in the ADU world, and that leads to the zoning, and the city just has to make housing inventory available. So that segues into that. I also want to mention Brian Walsh. I think it's Brian. Mr. Walsh had a question earlier directed at ADJOURN or members of the staff. If they could get back to that question and get it answered, he would appreciate that. And then segueing into what I just said off of it about the ADUs and the site inventories, I really think that the state has hit us with Sb9. And as far as I'm concerned, that has automatically added 500 units to the zoning inventory in the city. And that 500 units, each one of those potential lot splits has 2 units on it, in addition to the original house and the ADU. So we have 750 units. And as far as I'm concerned, we have fulfilled through Sb9. HCD and RENA came at us before Sb9 had passed. And I think they're an organization and an agency that doesn't exist anymore, fighting for something which is unnecessary in light of Sb9, which kind of did away with single family zoning by saying that every lot can be split. So I think we have 750 new units zoned. I don't think we need to play these games with the zoning if our residents don't want it. And I think we need to we'll come to this later, but I think we need to very carefully think about what modifications and when we make modifications to Sb9 vis-a-vis this housing cycle, and certainly by the future we need to be responsive. But I disagree with the stance that that Sb9, we have to have expressions of interest from citizens in order to qualify for our HCD numbers. If we do, I'll walk the streets and get those expressions of interest, just like they did in, was it Lodi? Ms. Turner knows, the city that has actually qualified based on expressions of interest. I'm sure that we can get them from our citizens and come up with 50 or 100 expressions of interest for potential lot split, pending revisions to an appropriate way to deal with this. So those are my thoughts about this, but obviously we need to go forward today on the individual lots, and we need to hear from everybody and then make some decisions as a group. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Luthold. Councilmember Turner, please.
Yes, I have a question for Diana. The 117 ADUs that you show, are those achieved through calculation?
Yes, those were based on the number of permits actually issued in 2019, 2021, and a more conservative projection for 2022. Averaging those.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, averaging those 3 years and then multiplying by 8 for the next 8 years that the housing element update will cover.
Have you actually gone out with a survey to the residents, asking our residents who intend to build ADUs before we actually identified the homes that we want to zone?
So we have not done that outreach on the ADUs because the direction that we have from HCD is that we can use this formula to project the number of units for ADUs. We don't need, or we don't need interest from specific property owners. We could project ADUs based on our recent history, which.
Well, okay, so I guess I'm a little confused here. If we go to our residents, right, and we get the number of ADUs that we need, 193, then chances are we won't need to go through this rezoning process that we have today, and that can become an option of a resident rather than identifying sites for rezoning.
So let me just clarify this for the commissioners and the council. When preparing the housing element, every city in the state of California is supposed to follow the guidelines promulgated by HCD for determining what sites can be included in a site inventory. So HCD provides guidance with respect to how many sites can be assumed, the development capacity of sites, and additionally has provided some guidance on respect to, how ADUs may be counted. Now, typically they're counted based on historical record of issuing building permits. However, the city can count other numbers, if there's a change in community circumstances where it is clear that the trend in building, there's a reason to believe that the trend in building would change, basically. So in terms of getting a survey from the community, that may not necessarily be valuable if it's not a methodology that HCD will accept. I'll defer to Diana and the consultant on that particular point, but with respect to preparing the housing element and all of the sites and determining whether or not you're meeting your RHNA, that is something that HCD decides how it's going to set the rules on and whether or not it's going to accept the housing element. Now, there are pretty significant consequences for the city if it doesn't play the ball game as HCD has set it up. Basically, if it does not submit a compliant housing element that is adopted by the deadline in May 2023. In order to meet that deadline, because HCD has a 90-day comment period to review and return comments on your housing element prior to adoption, that housing element needs to be out there in public and ready to adopt by no later than November of 2022. So typically, if you don't have a compliant housing element that's been certified by HCD, courts can adopt a variety of remedies, including suspending the city's ability to issue building permits, approve zoning changes, variance, and subdivision maps until a compliant housing element is adopted. Additionally, the city can appoint a court receiver to require the city to adopt a compliant housing element, basically taking that power to determine what sites and site inventories in that housing element away from the city council and elected officials. The court also has the discretion to approve building permits and subdivision maps for proposed residential projects while you do not have a compliant housing element if you fail to do it within 120 days of the due date. Additionally, folks can sue the city seeking to mandate that the city adopt a compliant housing element, and successful plaintiffs are entitled to attorney's fees depending on the length and complexity of litigation. Additionally, there's a builder's remedy in the Housing Accountability Act. So if a project includes at least 20% affordable housing for low-income households, it cannot be denied on any site where residential or commercial uses are permitted in the general plan, regardless of compliance with density. So there are some pretty significant consequences. Additionally, if the city fails to adopt an element, the city can be subject to suit by the Attorney General's office, who can seek an injunctive order and fines. Essentially, requiring the city, subjecting the city to monetary penalties for every month it remains out of compliance. So they're some of the most significant penalties that a city can face. So it is important for folks to understand that, not being in compliant with not adopting a compliant housing element that follows the, procedures and requirements of HCD for adopting and developing a site inventory is likely to lead to rejection by HCD. And the city will have a very short time period in which to possibly reverse course. And then additionally, if it doesn't reverse course, then you will be facing all of those other consequences potentially that I mentioned earlier. So with respect to, the issue before you folks, the staff report does identify that you're at least 50 plus units short, and you folks will have some, ability to decide how you think best to address that pretty significant policy question before you hear today. But I did want to impress upon folks that this is a fairly serious subject with respect to consequences down the line. If the city is unable to resolve the issue of getting compliant housing element together. Now, I think staff, we're proposing, discussion of rezoning of certain parcels. And my understanding is that is only going to result in a limited number of housing units as well. So additionally, for our second agenda item, the revisions to the Sb9 regulations is, an alternative tool. Obviously, if neither of these tools are palatable to the folks here today, there are other options that, can be explored as well, including rezoning for multifamily housing. And additionally, folks can also direct us to go back to the drawing board. But again, I think it's important to understand that there's a very limited time frame for getting creative.
Thank you for guidance, Attorney Arun. Let me go ahead and call upon Commissioner Sharma. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Lahi. So my question actually is a follow-up to what Councilmember Luthold had just talked about. So I guess I'm a little bit less, I'm a little reluctant to just use ADU as the only way that we meet these numbers, just because, it's we're basically considering a pretty short runway and saying, hey, just because last year we had all this, additional ADU construction that'll probably continue. Maybe not. We could probably argue about the number. But going to his second point on the Sb9, even without any of the proposed changes for this Sb9, what we already have, doesn't that already get us to the well above the limit, because we have all these potential lots that can be split. So I guess my question is, why do we need all these other changes if we can already use that to meet the requirement under Sb9?
So with the ADU projections, the state does offer the formula based on our recent history. For all other sites, and it is new in this housing element, is we need to demonstrate to HCD that there is a likelihood that sites will also add the additional units, either through a traditional subdivision or the Sb9 regulations. But we need to demonstrate not just that there is the zoning or the Sb9 regulations in place, but that we have property owners who are interested in building additional housing units over the next 8 years. So that's where the interest forms from the community would come in. At this point, we don't have a lot of interest on the Sb9 front because of the feedback that we've received is because the building square footage size is so limited. So so to date, the Sb9 regulations have not resulted in any applications for new housing units.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up question. How did we receive that feedback from the community? I mean, did we get a significant amount of responses that said, just because of the restrictions that we're currently imposing under SB9, there is not interest? And like, is the pool, like, I don't know, 50, 60 residents? Like, can you estimate about how much response did we actually get?
I would estimate that I've probably received, I would say 25 inquiries from different property owners interested in SB9. And the consistent feedback has been the 800 square foot building size limit is deterring any such applications.
If I may add, Diana, as far as those who are willing to sign on to say that they commit with our property owner interest form, we only have 2 SB9 intentions right now out of the 9 property owner interest forms that we've had filled out on our site.
Okay, so it may be that we haven't gotten responses from a lot of our community yet.
So Andy is referring to the Housing Element website, and that does allow property owners to express interest in adding additional units through different methods that the city has. Again, traditional rezoning or the SB9. The feedback that I have received has been, in person, speaking with property owners over the phone or at the counter at City Hall.
Oh, I see. So that's in addition. So what Andy and you're talking about are, okay, I understand now. Okay, thank you so much. That really helps give an idea of how many people have actually inquired or are interested. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here and just ask a real quick question, Diana. As far as the documented interest level of various different residents throughout the city of Monte Sereno in building ADUs, how is that handled with HCD as far as tracking that and documenting it with them? Or is it, the assessment of the city itself to, report on those numbers of interested residents that could be, potential builders of ADUs?
So for the ADUs, since we do have a history of the actual number of permits that have been issued,
right,
then that is the main guidance from HCD is to base the projection of ADUs on your historical building permits, or additionally, if there's changes to our requirements that are made that would make ADUs more, more people interested in building them, there could be an argument made to plan for higher than just a straight average. But for example, for the SB9 project, since there isn't a history of permits issued since the regulations were just effective in January of this year, that's where you need, the guidance from HCD is that you need some documented interest.
Right. In it. And that comes in the form of some kind of a document that we submit to them that we've received back so many of so far, correct?
Correct. We do have a place on the Housing Element website where people can express their interest in building an additional unit over the next 8 years.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and call upon Mayor Pro Tem Mekchak. Somebody else is trying to speak?
I was going to supplement Planner Perkins's answer. The HCD's Sites Inventory Guidebook, which is the guidebook that is used to assemble the site inventory that's submitted to HCD for approval, they recommend as a safe harbor that jurisdictions use trends in ADU construction since January 2018 to estimate new production of ADU units. They will accept other analysis to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So basically the burden would be on the city sort of demonstrate that its assumptions and methodology for assuming production is reasonable. Now, obviously, demonstrated homeowner interest would be useful for that. Yes.
Thank you. And that's why, when I did my discussion, I was emphasizing we need to do something to encourage ADUs and come up with some programs so that we could, have more ADUs built and also provide information to HCD. Anyway, let me call on Mayor Pro Tem Mekachuk. He's been waiting patiently. And then Commissioner Zeidler after that.
Thank you, Mayor Elahi. Let me see if I understand this correctly, Ms. Perkins. We need 193 units in our next RHNA cycle, as set forth in your document. And there are 117 ADUs based on the algorithm that we're being asked to use. So 193 less 117 is 76. And then we look at the rezoning opportunities on Vineland and Bicknell, and that's 23. So now we're down to 53 units that we have to come up with. And then there's 2 expressions of interest that I assume are not included in the 23 or the 117 because, well, they could be, but whatever. So now we're down to 51 units. Ms. Perkins, do I have that number correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what our goal is. And I believe Attorney Rudin said that you must, the state wants you to comply with your housing element, and you have to do it in good faith. And if you try to get around it, the consequences are somewhat draconian, I'll say. And if that's the case, then I believe that the city of Monte Sereno should move forward with an objective of meeting that deadline and complying with it in good faith. So then the question is, how are we going to get our 51 units? And that leads into the Sb9 discussion. And the Sb9 standards, if you will, or ordinance or whatever that we have in place today is not really, doesn't provide an incentive for people to come out and say, hey, I want to build an Sb9, do an Sb9 lot split unit, whatever. So what the market is telling us is that we need to make some adjustments to our Sb9, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So I just wanted to kind of frame that and make sure I had the numbers correct. I would think that as we go forward, if we do change our Sb9 regulations, then we can see what kind of, how the market reacts to that. And I believe we've got until November-ish to button that down in 2023, and you can back up a few months. Is that correct, Mr. Rudin? When is our drop dead date?
So as a practical matter, we have to have our draft element prepared in November of 2022, which would mean that it is important for us to start getting homeowner feedback for Sb9 purposes sooner rather than later. Ms. Perkins, can you walk us back in terms of maybe any additional lead time staff may need for that?
Yes, so our schedule, and we don't have specific dates yet for the end of the year, but would be to bring the final document to the Site and Architectural Commission and the City Council in December of this year. In the staff report on the 6th page, there is some dates laid out for the draft housing element. And so as part of that, we could include, as the mayor had suggested, an increased projection of the ADU units with some additional programs, additional incentives that we may offer, and see what feedback we get. And similar to the, what we end up projecting for SB9 projects. So that draft housing element, I think, is really key in getting the feedback into what direction the council and commission would like to take. And as I mentioned, those dates are laid out on page 6 of the staff report, with the council adopting a draft element in August and submitting it to the state that same month.
Right, I'm looking at the project schedule at the bottom of the page that starts May 24th, review sites inventory joint meeting, that's today, and then it goes June 21st, July 1, August 2, August 15. But there's nothing that goes from August 15 to when the actual quote deadline is. This is only a draft, it's not the final one. So
right.
I
final one is planned for December for the final document, but we don't have specific dates laid out yet for the community meetings and public hearings for the second half of the year, but we can certainly get that in the next week or two.
Perfect. And then Councilmember Leuthold, you were putting out some numbers where you didn't think that we had to do anything other than some rezoning, and I didn't quite catch the details of that and how you came up with those numbers relative to the 53 or the 51 that I went through and talked about a moment ago. Could you explain for my benefit what you think the numbers can be?
Well, yes. I mean, what I'm pointing out here is HCD was working in a non-SB9 world. And when we did this 8 years ago and went through this process, I wasn't involved in the zoning issue, but I was very much involved in the advocacy for what was zoned and what wasn't zoned, and how that all went out. People remember me from that, and I was really elected on the basis of what I did for that. But that was all done, as well as all of the HCD requirements for this housing cycle were done in a non-SB9 world. And my point is, SB9 did rezone all of our properties for us to allow lot splitting. Every lot in California, with a few exceptions, can now be lot split. How easy we make that, what are the objective standards, whether it's going to result in every lot being built is a different question. But the city of Monte Sereno is required to identify potential sites and to make sure the zoning allows for potential development. And now HCD is kind of changing that round and saying that we have to have the site inventory. Before, what we had to say was that the zoning was available to allow for this. Well, SB9 made the zoning available so that at least 500 of our 1,000 and so lots can be lot split. And I say at least 500 because some are in the high fire district, and that may or may not actually limit that. And I think that's still up in the air. We're hearing different things about it. We'll talk about that further. But at least half of our lots have now been rezoned effectively by SB9, and any of those lots can be lot split with the addition of the ADU. And so we're looking at, if I conservatively estimated 500 rather than 1,000, and then add the additional ADUs that go with those, I come up with 750 lots now available for development in Monte Sereno. And the only thing standing between a developer taking those lots, every single lot that comes up for sale in Monte Sereno can now be lot split, or the homeowner can do it. And it's going to happen as soon as we liberalize SB9. somebody can buy my house and scrape it and put up 2 houses and 2 ADUs on the lot, and it is clearly in the developer's interest to do so. So, and the developer will do it over the next 8 years, because a lot that is currently worth roughly $4 million will be worth $7 to $8 million built out with what is potentially being proposed if we strongly liberalize the Sb9 building requirements availability. So as far as I'm concerned, we literally have, the city of Monte Sereno now has an inventory of 750, and we're only required to have 200. And we also have our natural ADU growth, which is going to be well over 100. So that's how I calculated that. Now I get it that HCD isn't going to approve a housing element that says that, but this is something that we need to discuss, because I think not only us, but I think everyone is going to be pushing back on this. And I don't want to be blindly creating new zoning that is then going to be subject to even more lot splitting, and then find out that it wasn't necessary because SB9 trumped the HCD requirements and housing elements aren't even really a thing anymore. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you.
My conclusion is, I think we have to watch these timelines, but I think we want to be kind of developing it in parallel, but going slowly and watching what other cities are learning and what's coming down from the state and guidance.
Understood. So now I understand how you got from our current inventory, if you will, of parcels to 500 and then up to 750. Okay, I understand. The question then becomes, how much do we want to relax our SB9 standards that will accelerate the movement, the interest in doing lot splits? But that's the next agenda item. I would put forth that we accept the housing element update after we've heard from everyone. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, the SB9 would come out later. And also on the housing element, just to be clear, the number 117 is based on assuming that we'll only build ADUs at the rate they were built over the last 4 years. The rate is much higher now. It's at 24. So we'll be actually just the ADU requirement will gets close to fixing it. And we do need to show some evidence that we can do 24. And that's why I had that whole discussion about how we need to present that with ADU incentives and other things. So I think we'll be okay with just that. So I don't think we need to assume that our averages is going to be as bad as they were over the last 2 years. I know the pandemic year was thrown out, but still this whole ADU concept is now picking up steam. We've got people who are coming in and building prefab ADUs. So you will see more construction going on. With that, I will go to Commissioner Zeidler, please. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. So I read in the Chronicle, the Southern California jurisdictions had to submit their housing element before the Northern California jurisdictions. And I read that 97% of their housing elements were rejected by the state. 97%. They only accepted 6 out of 196. So we're contemplating a variety of changes that will likely, once they pay attention, be unpalatable to most of the community. And even if we make those changes, if we look at Southern California, the element will likely be rejected. So, and then changes will just beget other changes. We'll just have to keep, undermining our rural character in large lots more and more and more and more progressively. So my practical suggestion is, can we get a copy of one of the rejections from Southern California, a community similar to ours, small, affluent, et cetera, and see exactly what HCD told them? And also kind of piggybacking on Councilmember Luthol's point, if those requirements came about before SB9, do those rejections even mention SB9? Do they say you need more permissive SB9 implementing ordinances? Because if they don't, maybe we don't even need to be addressing that. So I think we need to look at Southern California and learn from them potentially. That's all.
That's a good suggestion. I don't know if Andy has some experience with Southern California rejections. If you want to share your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Elahi. Yes, and also Ms. Ziedler. We have been reading many of the rejection letters in Southern California. We have also read a report from ABAG where they have analyzed all of the rejection letters and found where the commonality is. And as I've stated in earlier presentations, the most common recognized mistake or pitfall, as one of the new advisory presentations that we've received from HCD, is that there is a lack of connectivity between an understood need for housing throughout the region, not just the community of Monte Sereno as a small city, but throughout the region, and having that related to both the sites and with the programs and policies. So we are working closely with staff to make sure that we are helping Monte Sereno put their best foot forward in connecting the dots on that. As far as the question for prescriptive requirements for Sb9, it's made clear that they will not accept this blanket statement that that basically the spirit of zoning has been changed for all single family zones throughout California, and therefore new capacity has been created. I understand that logic. It makes a lot of sense in many ways. Now that if there were to be a multifamily zone that enabled even just duplexes, in effect, that is a lower density now than what is capable within a single family zone. And with that being said, the newest information we have heard from somebody who's working very closely with several Southern California cities, and that's Veronica Tam. She's very well regarded in efforts for meeting HCD requirements. And what she has learned with small, affluent communities is that even if the capacity is able to be discovered, is able to be reported on and combined with a housing plan, HCD is rejecting it and saying we need to see that there is the possibility for a diversity of housing types within your community. So whether or not we move forward with that, with our first draft, I do want to bring it up as a point of thought-provokingness for now, and just preparation for the possibility that if we don't include any multifamily within our housing plan, there is a very good chance that that will be part of the rejection letter.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I have a follow-up request. Can we get kind of the source materials? I'm a lawyer by training, and you wouldn't just read someone else's brief and kind of take it at face value. And you just get so much more going to the source material. Is it possible to get copies of those rejection letters and see kind of verbatim what the HCD is saying and what their guidance is, so that none of us, have it, so we have the most clarity possible?
Certainly, we're happy to share a link with all of those letters. And I can also share with you the presentation that I mentioned that comes from HCD that outlines very clearly the common pitfalls that they're seeing in the Southern California cities. What they're making very clear is while we may learn from the experiences that are going on in Southern California, it's very important that we understand that duplication, in other words, if we see something that has worked in Southern California, if we try to mimic it, that is not going to be acceptable by HCD. They want to see that what we're doing is place-based, that what we're doing is specific to the needs that we have come to understand throughout the region of Santa Clara County. And it's a high bar that is growing. and this is something that has been made clear to us over and over again, that though there may be a plan that was accepted as adopted in Southern California, the expectations are growing with each round of housing plan reviews.
All right.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers your question. Commissioner Zaglia, did you have anything?
No, that's all for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Sharma, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lahi. So my first, I have 2 points. The first one, Commissioner Zeidler actually already addressed. It was to request that presentation that cites what are the reasons for the rejection of the from the HCD. That's one request, and so thank you for sending that. My second point is to the council members and to my fellow commissioners. I think that just listening to the amount of feedback we have received on the Sb9 projects and the interest. I think if I just did the math right now, it was about 35 people with inquiries. And we have about 1,300 households in Monte Sereno. So that's a very small number compared to the number of people that even inquired. So I feel that we need to spend maybe some, cycles in marketing or just, reaching and outreach to getting to the residents and listening to and getting their feedback on what they want. I'm very hesitant to just adopt the, especially in the second, item with just removing all restrictions on SB9 and making it much more permissive, because as we heard from, the residents that spoke today, they are, very concerned with that type of a direction. So I think we need a more comprehensive feedback and a bigger community participation before we can, make any decision. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, and this whole thing is kind of mixed up with the housing element and the SB9. So let's see where we get there. Councilmember Lawler, I see your hand, and then Councilmember Turner after that.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to make this point in support of Councilmember Luthold's point, is that in our general plan, our R144s and R120s are already subdividable for 3 to 5 lots, right? And then once those are subdividable, those lots in and of themselves are still subject to SB9 splits. So I would argue in favor of not rezoning and allowing the SB9 lot split to happen, because once those lot splits happen, they can't happen again. So we would have less density if we embrace the SB9 versus if we embraced zoning, which would ultimately lead to more density and more McMansions. So that's my point. I just wanted people to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. And since we have a recusal issue, if you can stay with the ADU issue right now, I think that's the first part of our staff report. And then the next part is the zoning part. And the third part is the SB9 part. So
okay, all right.
To keep them all separate, if we can, that may avoid any recusal things that might come up. Councilmember Turner?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment here. The documentation that you're looking for every lot, for every city, is actually found on the HCD website. And it's divided into 2, the SCAG region, which is Southern California, and the ABAG region, which is Northern California. And there are only 6, and Southern California is ahead of Northern California by 8 months. So they've been doing this for 8 months. And the number of cities that have gotten approval from HCD is very, very low. The first city, which is Solana Beach, had gotten approval from HCD in their first meeting, because when they went in front of HCD, they had letters from every citizen. They have 2,000 homes, so pretty much like Monte Sereno, to say, yes, we're willing to build ADUs. And that's how they got their approval. Now, and I'm not going to discuss this here, but there's also a movement in the SCAG region to challenge the HCD allocation for the cities, because there's a claim by the auditor that the number of allocations for each city has been overestimated by 900,000. So given that, one of the things I would suggest is that like Councilmember Lawler said, and Councilmember Luthold, is that we go out, no, I guess it was Commissioner Sharma, that we go out to the residents and ask our residents how many of them are actually going to build ADUs, because we may be able to satisfy our ADU numbers with the number of residents rather than forcing a rezoning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, anybody else want to talk? Anybody else raising their hand that I haven't seen? Okay. So is that, oh yeah, I see Councilmember Lawler's hand. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to put it down.
All right, Councilmember Turner, you're finished, I assume. Okay, all right. I guess we've done all the discussions on this subject, and we can. I guess we can give a sense on the ADU issue only to our staff as to how we would like them to handle. And that really has to do with how they're going to project the ADUs. I mean, the method they used was the average. However, I think the HCD, I'm sorry, I see Mayor Pro Tem Mekchek's hand up. So please go ahead.
Oh, you continue and then I'll go after you.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, the direction we need to give our staff is whether on the ADU issue, which is the only thing I think we're considering at this time, is whether they should go ahead and just use a three years average, or whether they can put enough together either by doing a poll of all our residents to see if they will be building ADUs, and also by providing a really good documentation on why we think we can have more ADUs based on what's happened in 2022, because the HCD doesn't say you can't do that. It just said, if you do something different than the average, you have to satisfy us that it's going to be doable. So we have to do a canvassing of our people. We also may have to provide some incentives, and maybe Attorney Rudin can help us if we say there's an incentive where we'll waive permit fees or something else, because ADUs are really designed to help build affordable housing. Would that be appropriate or not? And that may be an incentive that we can give them if they let us know by the end of this year, or by the time our reports are due, that they're going to build some ADUs, and that maybe we'll waive those fees or part of those fees. And we have to look at our budget to see what is reasonably we can accommodate. But it may not be that much, because we're looking at maybe 100 units. So some people are already building on it. So and providing resources to people who are building, providing them resources with the fire department, kind of come to contact with consultants, with contractors, and everybody else, and then seeing if we can go with a higher number and say, no, it's not going to be the average that was, I think, 16 based on the last 3 years. It's going to be closer to 24 based on what has happened so far this year. So I think that's what we need to discuss, to what direction we need to give staff to say, hey, be more aggressive, do all this stuff, but use the higher number, so that at least our housing element requirements are satisfied. And then we can go back and discuss the Sb9, because that's a separate issue, and the zoning. All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Please go ahead.
Okay, I believe that if there's an opportunity to get more information and better information through a survey on ADUs, that we go ahead and we do that. In terms of the rezoning, the Bicknell Vineland, I'm not hearing a lot of support for that. And I would caution us to do that, because I think it's captured by Sb9. And then I'm really looking forward to having the Sb9 conversation right after this.
Thank you. Yeah, we're trying to keep the zoning issue on Vineland, Bicknell out of our conversation, since there's some individuals who have to recuse themselves. Let's go to Commissioner Sharma. Please go ahead.
I just had one follow-up question, Mayor Elahi, to what you said on the ADU. So if you look at the report, it said we need, it to satisfy multiple income or affordability requirements. Would the ADU satisfy everything? Or maybe that's a question for Ms. Perkins.
Yes, thank you. So the way that we have been reporting, so every year the city is also required to send in a housing element progress report. So we provide updates on the number of building permits issued for different types of housing to show how we're progressing towards meeting the requirements of our current housing element. And so since 2019, when the state laws allowed or required for cities to allow for the ADU construction, we have reported the affordability based on a survey. So we send out a letter to every property owner who has constructed an ADU in the past year, and we ask them, what is it being used for and what rent is charged. So the majority, and it is on page 4 of the staff report, since 2019, 78% of the ADU units that have been constructed charge a rent level for the ADU that falls within the very low income category. Okay. So presumably, we would be doing something similar for secondary units built under Sb9. So the main houses are generally in the above moderate category, but the accessory units, which are some form of a rental unit, since it isn't a separate property, there isn't separate property ownership, those have been falling into the very low income category.
Right. So let me just clarify if I heard you correctly. Sb9 aside, just the ADUs alone, based on historically what we've surveyed the residents as they've used it, we can use that going forward to apply that same sort of assumptions to the ADUs that we're counting on being built in the future, and that would satisfy the affordability requirements as stated in the HCD plan.
So we would continue to do the surveys annually in preparation for our annual report that we submit to the state. I wouldn't anticipate a big change in the historical categories that we've seen. So I would presume it would be very similar in the future.
I got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Luthor, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I wanted to summarize a little bit on this issue, which is primarily ADU related at this point. What I think I'm hearing in terms of kind of the consensus for staff direction, and that is that a survey and an outreach at an appropriate time should become a major component. But I wanted to at least suggest that we not just do that now by way of a postcard. I think if we do this, it needs to be very, very wrapped up in education, saying we are going out, we are surveying for the next 8 years. This will be used to meet our housing element. If you have any plans to do so, we may or may not have incentive programs that we can explain to people. And we really want to generate people's understandings, not a vague send out a postcard and find and run a survey or put something on the website and survey people. I think we need to educate. And so I think we need to put together a whole plan on this so that we may be able to generate, as Ms. Turner kind of suggested for what worked for that Southern California city, signed letters by people saying that I understand that there's a housing element and I have intention to build my ADU within the next 8 years. And I think this qualifies as something under the housing element and so forth. And we really educate people about that, because I suspect, I mean, on my cul-de-sac, there are 6 houses, none of which have an ADU. I'm planning one, and I'm intentionally delaying it till the next cycle to help the city. And I think each of my neighbors, if educated about this, probably 3 or 4 of the 6, if not all 6, will be also planning ADUs rather than lot splits, because I think that's a way to build out our neighborhood and keep it from being subject to developers doing lot splits and scraping houses. So again, a lot of education is going to go in this, but I think by walking the neighborhoods and explaining this to people, the commissioners and the council members and maybe staff or people we hire to do this, that we can probably generate 190 letters of intent for the next 8 years. So I just wanted to say, let's not get ahead of ourselves in this, but I'm saying, I'm thinking that what we're hearing as a consensus is, let's figure out how to make this survey and make it very effective and usable for us. And if we generate 150, not 190, well, at least we have 150. We also have the picnic coming up this summer when hundreds of our citizens attend, and that'll be kind of potentially either a starting or an ending place to finish this campaign or begin this campaign. So those are my suggestions on that, that we not rush into this, but I think that the direction is a serious ADU survey and maybe a serious lot split survey once we know more about lot split. I don't know if we need nods and consensus, or if we need some sort of a motion that this is what we're doing. Sergio, do we need something other than consensus nods on this issue?
I will defer to Diana. Diana, do you need anything specific? Because there's not a requirement that they really vote on this.
Correct. So I think the direction for that is clear. So the consensus nods, I think, are a good indication.
All right. So before we all nod, let's hear Councilmember Turner. You're on mute, Councilmember.
I just wanted to let you know, Mayor Elahi, that there are people on chat that want to be called to ask for questions. So I think you should, I would recommend that you ask them to speak.
Okay, sure. Yeah, if you have any comments, and generally there's a one turnaround for comments, but this topic,
yeah, I know.
Yeah, but this topic is complicated enough, and we do want to hear from our residents as to what their opinions are. So whoever has their hands raised, I think we'll go ahead and invite them to help us with the discussion. So who's on chat that wants to talk? Please go ahead. Now is the time.
I have 3 hands raised. The first one is Sarah.
All right, Sarah, go ahead. You're on mute, Sarah. Sarah, did you want to say anything? Please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll go to the next person who has their hands raised. I don't know if her hand's been raised from before or whatever. So let's go to the next one.
Michelle is next.
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead. Michelle, we can't hear you. Are we having any issues with our Zoom lines or phone lines?
I'm not sure. We can.
Michelle, now you're on mute. Okay.
We can try with the next person.
The next person, and then you guys can come back.
Yeah, Skip Pearson.
Skip, go ahead.
I still need some clarity. I don't know if it's just because I don't know why, but every lot, even after an Sb9 split, has the ability to have a regular accessory dwelling unit and a mini accessory dwelling unit. And in my mind, that's the difference possibly between low and lower income units to satisfy the need for diversity of different income people. So if that's the case, when Councilmember Sean mentioned the possibility of at least 500 lots being splittable in Monte Sereno, doesn't that couldn't you also add 2 additional accessory dwelling units, a regular one and a mini one, to each one of those new 500 lots? I'd appreciate it if perhaps Diana could elaborate on that and get me straight.
Diana, if you can make a note of the questions and then perhaps answer other questions and this one at the same time, or that's the only one that you can answer that. But let's go through whoever else has any questions from our residents. And I know Michelle had something in the chat saying she's having some problems. Okay. I think we sent her a phone number or something to call back on. Is there somebody else online?
Yes, we have B. Walsh who'd like to speak.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank, this was an interesting discussion and I appreciate, and by the way, I actually will admit, I thought this was going down a different path. I thought that you guys were going to go and at this meeting trying to find a larger number of units and possibly even go higher or lower than R122 or R120. So I appreciate that, because I went around to my neighborhood and asked people if they even knew about this meeting, and they did not. We tried to get Sherry, who is one of the people that is being affected by this. She tried to get in earlier. She had some technical difficulty. She had no idea about this meeting. So this is just, it's really unacceptable. And I really like the direction that you guys are going to actually go and do a real survey on this, because guys, I get it. I want to do this too. I think we need to do the right thing. But when we try to cram down certain things and just blindly take direction from, oh, well, so, you know, I'm sorry, Southern California didn't get passed, so we're going to have to up the ante. Is that really our answer? I mean, so we need to look at a little bit more. I like a few of the things that were said. I won't mention who was saying them, but let's continue to go down this path and try to figure this out. And we can do this. The 193, the thing that I really got frustrated on is 193, and we came with the solution of 117, or actually, excuse me, 117 plus 22. That's unacceptable. Either it's not 193, or it is 193, it's 117, or it's not 117. But to come to us and come with a solution that is far below it, I was very concerned that this was going to be a Trojan horse and trying to, like, oh, well, you know something, let's just cram it all on Bicknell or something like that. That really concerned me. We need to be a little bit more transparent. So thank you very much. And I do appreciate the direction of this meeting. I feel much better now than I did before when I read the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's the problem we've had with the state. I think we at the city are amenable to listening to our residents and doing what is best for all of us. The state seems to think it can tell us what to do, and that's the quandary we are in. So hopefully you can help us with the survey and everything else. So we need everybody, we're all in it together. We are all residents of Monte Sereno, so it's not like it doesn't affect each one of us individually. Any other comments from the public? Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else?
We could try Michelle again. Her hand is up.
Okay. Go ahead, Michelle. Please try it one more time. And we still can't hear you, so.
She's still having technical difficulties.
Yeah, sometimes it's a problem with the Zoom. I think there's on the next to the mute button, you can press something and it starts working. right, I guess, yeah, we're gonna have difficulty hearing you, Michelle, but we have a very long meeting, so if you can come back at a later time, we'll be happy to let you in.
Okay, and then we have Tony Jeans with his hands up.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, council members, and committee members. I wanted to just get one point out while we're talking about ADUs. I do design homes and ADUs, and there is interest in ADUs. So I think that the suggestion of polling people is a good idea. I think that will be a source of some housing units. That was, I think, Mr. Leotold's suggestion there. I think also one of the things that I have to disagree with Mr. Leotold in is the 500 units for SB9. The reason I don't believe that is possible is the way SB9 is written. I know we're talking not about that, but I'm talking about the 500 units. It is a homeowner who has to live on that property. It's not a developer who can go in and buy a property, demolish a house, and build on it, having split the lots. That is not possible with the way that SB9 is written. So when we get around to SB9, we can talk a little more about that. But for now, I think the rosy light of potentially 500 units is very impractical because it has to be the homeowner who is the person who is doing that, probably someone who's going to sell off part of their land. But we'll get back to that later. ADUs was one thing, and the 500 unit comment concerned me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. And so that may be helpful in the poll that is designed to find out if people are going to build ADUs. It could also be at the same time a poll to figure out if they're going to be building an SB9 unit or not. And when we get to the SB9, we can get more into that. So appreciate that. Anybody else online?
Mayor, Mr. Walsh wanted to try having Michelle speak through his
sure
his thing. So I'm gonna...
All right. So you can do that now. If you're ready, please go ahead. If not, we can always cycle back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulty. These are, it'd be nice to have a couple alternatives going forward on these meetings in case we have this problem like a chat version. But anyway, I just wanted to say from an ADU standpoint, I appreciate that the council is looking to solicit input from the constituents of Monte Sereno rather than trying to do a peanut butter spread approach that might work or might not work with the state of California. I wanted to raise concerns with the fact that more public notification would be very helpful on meetings like this and content like this. Specifically as someone who lives in the Bicknell area, I was surprised to see just really predominantly 2 streets in all of Monte Sereno targeted for this action. I would imagine that in the city of Monte Sereno, as Sean mentioned, everyone is available and capable of being able to build an ADU or a secondary structure on their property. And so let's start there and make this everyone's problem rather than a targeted audience and see if we get some interest going. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm glad you were able to join us. Anybody else on the public who wishes to talk or speak on the subject? All right, so general direction that we're giving to our staff on the ADU issue is to go do a poll and do a survey that is a personal survey, face-to-face, knock on every door, or in some other manner, at least, or maybe call everybody else, or maybe directly email everybody else personally. So explore all those possibilities and see if they're going to tell us whether they're going to build an ADU or not. So that's for the ADUs, and whether the SB9 issue comes in, I think we can discuss that later on. So those are the general directions. Anybody else wish to add anything to that? Sean, have I summarized your thoughts on that?
No, you did a good job on that. And I guess that I have a question as we begin to segue to the next discussion, and whether or not we really need to do the breakout sessions with the various district, with the conflicts and people out, or whether this has essentially tabled the issue of the zoning until a later date or a later stage of the process, or whether we still need to go through the exercise of doing each of these votes related to the zoning. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Mayor, and what the city attorney's thoughts are on that, whether we need to go through that exercise or not.
Yeah, so I think that the council can entertain a motion to table that discussion. And if it gets a second, you would take public comment. And then at that point, you would vote on tabling it. But if you're going to get into substantive discussion and decision-making on the individual sites, then we should segment the decision, and affected individuals should have the opportunity to recuse.
So moved.
So the motion.
Seconded.
All right, so the motion before council is to table the issue which had to do with discussing rezoning on Vineland and Bicknell and another street there that's in the neighborhood is in front of us. But Attorney Rudin, some of the people that are voting on the motion would be recused on that. So do we do the motion based after they recuse themselves, or can everybody vote on that motion?
I think everybody can vote on that motion.
All right, so we have a motion by Councilmember Luthol, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Makachuk. Please do a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Turner?
Yes.
Councilmember Lawler?
Yes.
Councilmember Luthol?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Makachuk?
Aye.
Mayor Elahi?
Aye.
Commissioner Zeidler?
Yes.
Commissioner Sharma?
Yes.
Commissioner Booker?
Yes.
Commissioner Balasubramanian, sorry.
Yes.
And Chair White.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you. Hang on. Okay, that takes care of a major issue. So then the next item we have to discuss is SB9. Let's get this. All right, so let's get into the SB9 discussion. I think that's the next one, right? We already had the staff report on that. Is there something you want to reiterate on that, Ms. Perkins? Want to refresh our memory a little bit more on that?
So I'm sorry, are we moving on to item number 2 on the agenda for the full SB9 discussion?
Okay, yeah, that is an item number 2. I guess the zoning thing was just part of the first item, but you also had an SB9 project in there where you were trying to do the numbers, I suppose. So let's go to item number 2. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening again. In September 2021, the governor signed Senate Bill 9 into law, which requires that jurisdictions allow ministerial approval of up to 2 housing units on each single family zoned lot, and for the approval of a 2-lot subdivision for each single family zoned lot. In January, the council adopted an ordinance to incorporate the state SB9 legislation into the municipal code and adopted additional requirements where allowed for such projects. Since the adoption of the SB9 ordinance, staff has received quite a few inquiries from property owners interested in SB9 projects on their property. However, we have not received any applications to date. And the feedback that we have received is that the current building size limit of 800 square feet is the deterrent that makes these types of projects not feasible. So council did have a meeting on April 19th, or at the meeting on April 19th, council did discuss possible recommendations to the SB9 requirements and directed staff to schedule this joint meeting tonight with the Site and Architectural Commission and to provide some recommendations to modify the current ordinance. So to summarize, staff is recommending 5 changes to the ordinance. The first would be to revise the maximum building size allowed for an SB9 project to equal the allowable size of a 1-story building under the applicable zoning district for any given site. Secondly, revise the height limits to specify that SB9 projects are limited to 1 story with a maximum building height equal to that allowed by the zoning district. Thirdly, to remove the size limit of covered porches. This was placed in the current ordinance to limit the size of covered porches in proportion to an 800 square foot sized house. And if that size limit is increased, the covered porch limit may not be needed any longer either. Another recommendation is to remove the impervious coverage restriction that is specific to SB9 projects and use the limitations that are applicable to the zoning district, which would be applicable to the project. And lastly, to allow property owners who complete an urban lot split to have an option of building any new houses under the ministerial review process or through the traditional discretionary review process, which does require a public hearing in front of the Site and Architectural Commission. Staff does recommend that the council and commission make a motion tonight. I think would probably be best to provide direction on if changes are necessary to the ordinance, and if so, what changes you would like for staff to return to the commission and to the council with a formal ordinance. And if I could just note, one typo was brought to my attention in the staff report. At the table on page 4, where the first line of the zoning district shows the R144 district, that should actually read the R18 zoning district. And where the R18 is on the last line should read R144. So I do apologize for the typo, and that concludes the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. That's a difficult subject that you're delving into. And I know, I guess Andy's probably been helping you out with that, but let's go ahead with the questions for the staff, please, at this time. Mayor Pro Tem Makachuk, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Perkins, let me see if I can summarize this accurately. What we're doing is we're saying if you have an R144 lot today, the square footage that's allowed for 2 stories is 1 or 2 stories is 3,000 square feet. Sorry, R18. I'm just going through the first line. And we passed a resolution previously saying that we would limit the square footage for a lot split to 800 square feet. And now what the recommendation is that we allow the current zoning for a single story building, which would have a 10% bonus to it. So it would be from 3,000 square feet for 2 stories to 3,300 square feet and holding it at 1 story. Is that correct?
Yes. If I could just clarify, this table on page 4 for the square footages allowed is for a 1-story building.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah,
my question for you is, could we, I have 2 questions. I have one for Attorney Rudin afterwards. Could we keep this at 3,000 square feet and keep it at 1 story just as kind of a throttle to see what the interest is? Like moving it from 800 to 3,300 is a big jump, but 800 to 3,000 is a smaller jump. And then if we wanted to beyond that, if we weren't getting the interest, we could move it to 3,300. Could you comment on that, please?
Correct. Yes, council can direct a different square footage allowance for the ministerial projects under the Sb9 regulations. And again, the last recommendation, the fifth bullet under the recommendations tonight would also be to allow property owners to have the opportunity if the Sb9 standards were too limiting, that they could submit a site development permit under our sort of current or traditional discretionary review process and have a hearing at the Site and Architectural Commission meeting, which would allow them to build to the current actual zoning standards. So not the I guess, Sb9 standards, which may be more limiting.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lawler.
Thank you, Mayor. So Diana, when we're talking about the proposed Sb9 standards, since the 3,300, the 4,950, the 6,600 are limited to 1 story, is this the max coverage allowed on a lot of the resulting zone? Question 1. And 2, would it be prudent to make that the total amount buildable on those lots in a lot split? In other words, you can build 3,300 on an R18, but if you want an ADU, then your house is 2,300 and your ADU is 1,000 square feet. So that's where I'm going with this, since these are 1 story.
Correct. So yes, you could limit both units. So I know the recommendation is a little confusing, but it was trying to emulate our current allowance for a main house and an ADU. So
it includes that ADU square footage in this number.
If the second unit were larger than 850 or 1,200 square feet. So the recommendation would be that you could have, so let's take the R120 zoning district, for example, where the current allowed single story or 1 story house is 4,950 square feet. So you could build 1 house at 2,000 square feet and I'm sorry, this is the staff recommendation, obviously not what you could do now, but the recommendation would be that you could have 1 house at 2,000 square feet and the second at 2,950. Or you could have 1 house at the full 4,950 and you could still have a second unit of at least 850 to 1,200 square feet if you meet the coverage requirements.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is that I wouldn't allow that second option. Because in a way to preserve the look and feel of our neighborhood and the space and to prevent everything looking like McMansions in a row, I would want to cap that. And so that's the total amount possible, all structures in.
Correct, that would be definitely direction that you can provide tonight.
Okay.
Just if I made 2 thoughts on why the recommendation was the way it is presented tonight, is that it was staff's opinion that 2 equally sized units, so again, a 2,000 square foot unit and a 2,900 square foot unit is more of a duplex feel, which may not be as desirable. And so this, the recommendation, the idea was that it would incentivize the smaller unit, which again emulates our current ADU standards, and then also encourages a smaller unit for our housing element goals.
So we would have to have language in there that one of the 2 structures could not exceed 1,000 feet for an R120 or 1,200 feet for an R144 or 850 for an R18. We could put that language in there, right?
I think I would confirm with the city attorney, but I believe that is direction you could provide.
So yeah, so total square footage would be 4,950, but the second unit would have to be limited to X. 1,000. Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Turner? Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the definition of SB9. So SB9 allows you to split a lot into two, 40, 60, or 50, 50. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if I had a house in the middle, right? In order for the property owner to exercise SB9, they have to demolish that house because it has to be 40, 60, and 50, 50. Right?
Possibly, yes. Yeah.
Not possible. It has to be. Right? Otherwise, you won't be able to grant an SB9.
Correct. Each site could be different depending on the location of the main house, but there are definitely possibilities where the existing house.
No. I want to be clear about this because this is essential. If I have a lot and the house is in the middle of the lot and the property owner says, I want to exercise SB9, but I'm not going to demolish my house, right? That property owner cannot exercise SB9 because it has to be split 40, 60, or 50, 50.
Correct. If they can't meet the requirements of SB9, which include the splitting in the proportions, as you mentioned, then such a project would not be approved.
Okay.
Keep in mind that somebody who owns a lot does not necessarily have to split that lot in order to make use of SB9. So that is one, thing to consider. Two, the city's not allowed to impose any objective zoning standards, subdivision standards, or design standards that would physically preclude the construction of up to 2 units, or that would physically preclude either of the 2 units from being at least 800 square feet in floor area. So if there's an existing house and it is physically possible to construct an additional 1 unit of 800 square feet, we would have to allow that, notwithstanding anything else.
That's not SB9 though, right?
No, that is SB9.
I think, can you say that again? Attorney Rudin, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
So there are 2 provisions in SB9, right? One is the 2-unit development provision, and the other one is the urban lot split provision. And one does not need, somebody who is applying for a project does not need to use both of those. So you could have an urban lot split and someone could try to develop both lots. However, on an existing lot, somebody could still apply using the 2-unit provision if they have an existing house. So as long as it met your requirements for your 2-unit provision, somebody could apply for a second unit using that provision.
Okay.
Without doing a lot split.
Okay, so here's another question that I have. If I have a lot and I split it into 2, the second lot cannot be exercised by the same owner. That owner has to sell the second lot. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of no requirement. I don't think there's such a requirement in the statute.
Can you double check that? Because when I talked to other local electeds under Cali, this is what they were saying. So I just want to be sure that we have our laws here straight.
So the urban lot split provision requires that the applicant sign an affidavit stating that they intend to occupy one of the housing units as a principal resident for a minimum of 3 years. And it states that a city cannot impose any additional owner occupancy standards other than provided in this law on an urban lot split. So basically, the only thing the city can require is an affidavit under penalty of perjury from the applicant stating that they intend to reside in one of the housing units that is eventually developed on one of the 2 lots. So beyond that, there's no other requirements the city can impose on who owns it.
Okay, can I take this further a little bit? So if I had 2 lots, right? At what point do I end up paying taxes for 2 houses, 2 lots?
As once the lot split is approved and presumably recorded as a parcel map, the county assessor would then be entitled to assess it as a separate lot. They would do an assessment and your property taxes would likely increase. I don't know if it would be immediately increased via supplemental assessment. I suspect that that would be the case, but no later than the next tax roll. So
okay, I think this is another area, because what I heard was that they won't pay property taxes until the house is built.
I have never heard such a thing.
So yeah, and I think maybe Diana, you can check up on these things.
I've actually left a message just yesterday for the assessor's office to see how reassessments would work on a traditional subdivision or an SB9 urban lot split, if it is different. And I haven't received information back, but when I do, I'll certainly pass that along. And if I could just add one other point, Councilmember Turner, I think you might have been referring to the requirement where one property owner or one person should not be doing an urban lot split on two adjacent parcels.
Yes.
So you can do an urban lot split on one parcel, and then you have two and you own those two until you decide not to. Then any adjacent parcel to that original parcel, you would not be doing an urban lot split for.
And here's another thing I'd like for you to check. I was told that SB9 lots cannot be included in the housing element. Whether that's true or not, I think we need to check that.
We will.
And there's very little guidance on that. But in HCD's most recent SB9 fact sheet, let me just pull this up really quickly. HCD says, to utilize projections based on SB9 towards the jurisdiction regional housing need allocation, the housing element must, 1, include a site-specific inventory of sites where SB9 projections are being applied. 2, include non-vacant sites analysis demonstrating the likelihood of redevelopment and that the existing use will not constitute an impediment to additional residential use. So in plain English, there's guidelines where HCD requires cities to do additional analysis on existing sites to see if they are realistic possibilities for additional units in light of what's on them. And that includes consideration of owner interest. So this is one of those where we hear why owner interest in SB9 lot splits is required is because this is one of the factors that HCD is considering and may use to chuck out your proposed inclusion of an SB9 site. And 3, the city must identify any governmental constraints to the use of SB9 in the creation of units, including land use controls, fees, and other exactions, as well as locally adopted ordinances that impact the cost and supply of residential development. So here again, HCD is saying your SB9 standards may be a factor where we may potentially kick out what you are providing us as your analysis. And 4, a city must include programs and policies that establish zoning and development standards early in the planning period and implement incentives to encourage and facilitate development. Now, that's unclear to me exactly what that requires. And I think perhaps Andy can comment as to how he has seen HCD consider SB9 sites in the SCAG elements and other places.
So far, what we've seen is that the property owner interest goes a long way, and we can also do more specific analysis and bring that back at our next meeting. We can bring back examples.
Thank you.
What might be helpful is if you can do the polling of the lot of the individuals. So when you're doing the polling for the ADUs, this could be done at the same time, but people may need a little bit more clarification as to what they can do. So that's what we're discussing today, hopefully. All right. Chair White, did you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I guess I do have one question. What's the motivation for revisiting the statute? If City Council is of the opinion that this statute is defensible and it's not going to be part of the RENA allotment, then what's the motivation to amending it? I see a letter from a lawyer. I see a designer that's going to benefit from it. Independent of those two, what's the motivation?
I think we brought it up for discussion. I mean, when we adopted the ordinance, it was done in a very early time frame, and we didn't have any history as to what would work and what would not work. I mean, my goal basically was to provide a housing unit that would provide for affordable housing. So keeping it at 800 square foot, you had a better chance of satisfying the affordable housing requirements than anything else. But it seems like that has not worked, and we are not getting anywhere with anybody wanting to do a lot split. So I think we need to see if that by itself is going to run into problems or not. And the attorney letter is important in the sense it sets out the reason as to why what we've done may not work. And our attorney believes it, and it's, I guess I should let that go because that's a client confidential issue. But unless Attorney Reardon wants to step in and answer that, but that's why we're having the discussion, whether we did it at a time when there was not enough information and now we have more information, whether we need to revisit it. And maybe we don't. So that's why we're all here. That's why we're looking forward to your help in that also.
Yeah, and I'm supportive of a discussion, particularly if it's going to help us with the housing element. And I'm not sure that's clear. So that's my concern.
If I may add, the staff's motivation, I guess, or what prompted us to bring this back to the council and the commission was two main issues. One is feedback we've received from members of the community asking for reconsideration. And then secondly is to achieve the housing element allocation. So if the SB9 ordinance were modified in a way that there was more community interest, and we can document that interest from community members, we can count those additional units in our housing element towards our 193 allocation.
And half of those 193, I believe, are either low income, moderate income. Isn't that right?
Correct. For the income categories, looking it up right now, of the 193, there is a total of 83 that are very low or low income, which was also the reason for a recommendation to modify the ordinance in some method, and it could be a different method than what is proposed in the staff report, but to encourage or perhaps even require the smaller unit in addition to what would typically be the main house, because those rental units and contribute towards our lower income requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Andy, you have your hand up? Not anymore. All right, Council Member Luthor, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll definitely have some more discussion when it comes back after public comment for discussion. But I wanted to mention at the front of this, and again, just kind of echoing the sentiment that the mayor mentioned, this was, SB9 came along and was really designed for purposes of promoting affordable housing. And it came up with some minimums, and I think we did a good job. Staff worked really hard to say, we want to go slowly. Most, if not all of us, have been elected with a very clear mandate to keep Monte Sereno serene and the rural character. That's part of our goals for the city, and it's something that we're always focused on. And SB9 is really a major change to California and potential housing inventories. But I think we all, or most people will agree, it wasn't designed to get a bunch of very affluent communities to take their 1 acre lots and split them into half-acre lots. That wasn't the problem the state was trying to solve. It may be a side effect, And we did get some input from people who had some situations that provide us with some really interesting guidance. A person whose lot was bigger than 1 acre and or close to 2 acres, I forget, but they couldn't split because of our slope density, but they were right on the edge and they wanted to build that extra home for their family member. And that was important. And then another one showed us very clearly how the layout would work for them so that we could see a real life example of what they were proposing. And we could see why the 800 square feet was not going to be attractive to them if they were going to do the lot split. So I think we've learned a lot more. I think we're going to hear more from the public on this. But then we're going to have to decide if changes are needed at this time and the speed that we make them at. So this is a discussion, not something that we do. Also, I think my feeling about this is similar to the other. I think we're going to need a lot of outreach because the 4 homeowners or 6 homeowners who are very interested in doing this to solve specific needs are telling us what would work for them. Mr. Jeans has put a lot of energy into saying, you know, what would be practical and how would you get your language right if you want to accomplish 2,000 or 3,000 square foot second houses and larger sized ADUs. And so I think that it's been helpful so far, but I think we're still on a learning curve and other cities are on a learning curve. And then we have to decide how this ultimately fits with the character. So I'm interested in getting the input now and probably getting more input later as more public becomes aware of this. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Makachek.
Yes, I wanted to remind or reflect in terms of the affordability. I believe in the city of Monte Sereno, when the survey is completed, that we have a lot of ADUs that are being rented at below market rates. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, the way the numbers work. You have to meet the minimum thresholds. You don't have to meet the maximum thresholds. So it appears that when someone builds an ADU, they use it for a family member and they charge them little, if any, rent. So that's how we're meeting the low income requirement. And it's vastly going over what our allocation is.
All right, so question time. Councilmember Lawler, did you have any questions for staff?
I do have a question for staff. Once an Sb9 lot is split, it'll be flagged as such and cannot be split again, correct?
It could not be split again under Sb9.
However, if an R144 is split into 2 R120s, could either of those R120s be subdivided into 3 lots under our general plan?
Not under the current regulations, no.
So once it's split, that's it. No more splitting.
Nope. In practicality, yes. Technically, you cannot resplit under Sb9. However, if there was an unusual site or in the future, 10, 15 years down the line, there was a zoning change, a traditional subdivision compliant with the zoning standards could still be done.
Okay,
so it has to be compliant with the zoning standards.
Okay, so if an R144 is split into 2 R120s, one of those R120s can still be subdivided
if it complied with the zoning standards. And that would be through the public hearing parcel map process, not through a ministerial Sb9 process.
Okay, all right, that was my question. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Councilmember, I'm sorry, Luthel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Lawler's comment because I want to make sure that we're understanding the inverse of that as well, which is I think, and Ms. Perkins, correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to, and I'll just use an example, take a Vineland property that is currently zoned R144, zone it R120, as part of our steps along the way to meeting the housing element. Those two R120 lots that we created the zoning for could each be then lot split into essentially 8s or 10s via lot split, correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's something to be watching for. And also, to be able to do lot split, you have to be able to go to the lower R18 or whatever else that needs to be there. Is anybody else have any questions of staff? If not, we'll go to our residents or concerned citizens who would like to address council this time. Is there anybody out there who wants to address us? Please raise your hand. I'm sure Mr. Jeans is out there somewhere. And Mr. Walsh said a yes. Are you able to get him? Michelle, are you able to log Mr. Walsh in?
1 second.
Okay, there he is. Great, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Walsh. You're on.
Thank you very much. Okay, actually, I love the discussion. It's great. First of all, my first question is, if we do this, do you relinquish, and this is probably a question for Sergio, is does a property owner relinquish his Prop 13 rights? We really need to understand these things, and the people that you're going to go talk to need to understand the ramifications of what you're going to do if you do this. I also am very concerned that Councilwoman Turner brought up the 60/40, and that was completely blown off. No one, we just walked right over that. It didn't even, it's like we never had that discussion. So I'd like us to continue that. And then also, we have to know each other. We have to know who we are. As a city of Monte Sereno, I will give you specific examples on my street that we have no control. We do not have the infrastructure to do what we're talking about doing. This administrative approvals people get taken advantage of. The city gets taken advantage of for this. I'll admit it. We were one of the people that talked about when the administrative approval on Elm Park where they were raising the roof, and the city said no, they weren't raising the roof on our administrative approval. We told them to come out there, and we caught them in the middle of, there was a 6-foot raise of the roof. No one had any idea. We do not have any control of these things. So we need to have control if we're going to make these things. The other example is at the end of the street where there was a ADU, and then we all knew what was going on. They built this covered garage, and we were wondering, why are they doing that? And then they came back as soon as they got the permit, and they built a JADU and closed it in. Is that really what we want to do? If we don't have control of what we're doing, we shouldn't be making these rules that just these administrative approvals that people just go and do, because people, I hate to be this way, but at the end of the day, some people are dishonest and they will actually break the rules, and we will have people that know how to break the rules and they will do it. So please do not really limit the administrative rules. I trust you guys if you actually review the product, but the administrative over-the-counter stuff has got to go. So please, thank you. That was my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Appreciate that. Anybody else on the public have any comments?
Yes, we have Eric Ramakrishnan.
Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I represent 4 different property owners in the city of Monte Sereno that want to take advantage of SB9 but aren't able to under the current rules. They're all longtime residents, and in several cases, relaxing the standards to be consistent with state law would allow people to stay within the city when otherwise they might need to move, and or would allow family members to live with individuals. And so from that basis, I encourage you to give serious consideration to and to adopt the staff recommendation in this case. I also believe that the city's current ordinance is inconsistent. It violates state law. I know that we disagree about that, but I think more importantly for our discussion here, as staff has indicated, relaxing the rules to be consistent with state law could encourage more people to take advantage of SB9 and help the city meet its RHNA targets in order to comply with the housing element law. And so I think that would be a very valuable thing for the city. I also just want to really commend staff for the ordinance that they put together. I actually think it's very elegant the way that it's written. It applies the existing zoning standards consistent with the size of the lot rather than how it's zoned. And in that way, essentially largely preserves the status quo, even though more units might be able to be built. The actual amount of development doesn't really change or that much in any case. And so I really commend them for coming up with a creative solution that will that addresses all of my legal concerns. It addresses substantially all of my clients' practical concerns, and I think that it will help maintain the community character while being consistent with state law. So I commend staff. I encourage your council and your commission to accept their recommendation and move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishes to address council?
Yes, we have Justin Lerman.
Go ahead, Mr. Lerman.
Hi, thank you very much. It's good to see everybody again. So I'm one of the people that we talked about SB9 earlier on. Our property is up on the hill, and it's a 2.6 acre lot. And because of the slope density, we can't subdivide, even though there's plenty of room for 2 houses or 4 units actually. And so we were hoping to use SB9 as a way to keep our family in Monte Sereno. I think that the previous regulations, which we don't feel to be in line with the letter of the law or the spirit of the law, we're going to prevent us from doing a lot split and building those additional units. And so we think that the changes that are proposed by staff are in line with something that would encourage the right development. I don't think that it creates the McMansions. I don't think that it changes the character of Monte Sereno. We've been here for over 30 years, and so we don't want it to change it any more than anybody else. We feel that the minor changes to the regulations that are proposed would allow people that have the proper situation that would allow for a real meaningful improvement to the city are captured. So it would be our recommendation that we move forward with the proposed changes. We think it'll help improve the neighborhood. It will help to keep people in the neighborhood that grew up here, that have kids here, and want their kids to grow up here, and to keep it serene. Yeah, so we appreciate the hard work done by staff, and we appreciate the recommendations, and would love to see them move forward.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else wishes to be heard?
Yes, we have Janet Chapin.
Go ahead, Mr. Chapin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank the council and mayor. Thank you all for hearing what we had to say. I was one of the citizens that spoke at the city council meeting when this was under consideration previously, And my husband and I are one of the, we're one of the families that would like to take advantage of SB9. And I think this has been a great discussion. And I also agree with everything the previous homeowner was talking about with respect to this is heading in the right direction. And I think it'll be a great thing for the community. One thing I was hearing when I was listening earlier to some of the commentary is I feel like sometimes we all kind of get caught up in trying to meet the housing element requirements. And sometimes we kind of get in this bubble of we've got to meet the requirements. And I think it's really useful if you just can take a step back and put yourselves in the shoes of individual citizens, which, myself and some of the others that are speaking tonight represent, and think about, well, what's going to get these people to want to go ahead and really do this and take advantage of SB9 in a way that will help us meet our housing element goal. And, I think doing the poll and all those things are also good ideas. But really, when you think about the motivations, there has to be an economic incentive as well. It has to make sense for us to do it. And if you think about giving up 40% or more of your lot in Monte Sereno, then there has to be the flexibility to build a home on that second lot that is a home that someone who was either buying it or renting it from you would want to live in at the rate they'd have to pay to occupy 40% of a piece of property. In our case, it's 1.5 acres. So it's, could be 3/4 of an acre or more, that has to make sense for them. And so when you think about it in that perspective and say, well, what would make me, if I was that person on a lot that could potentially be split, would make me want to do it and would make me, or would stop me from doing it. That's where the 800 square foot home limit, stopping people. I think that way of thinking about it can probably help to further clarify the thinking and what the regulations would look like. And that's also where the discretionary review to comply with the current zoning standards, I think, comes into play. And I think that's what most of the residents would end up using, which of course then gives the council a lot of leeway to be able to, make sure that the split lots and new development makes sense. So anyway, I fully support the way that the staff is recommending to go. I think it'd make a great difference for our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And do we have anybody else?
Yes, Kevin Hayes.
Yeah, Mr. Hayes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members and commissioners of the Site and Architecture Commission. I am also one of the homeowners mentioned this evening. And I speak obviously in support of the staff recommendations. I think that this is a realistic approach to the problem, unlike well, essentially what you did the last time, you said, no, thank you, we don't want any SB9. And that was shown in the reaction to your ordinance. And I think now you're considering something that is real. I personally don't think, having spoken to quite a number of people, a lot of people are not interested in doing this. The numbers of 500 and all that are just way over the top. I think the numbers are probably less than 50 that will do a lot split out of the 1,300 households that are in Monte Sereno. Just a little aside, I was very amused with the remark about maintaining the quote rural character of the area. I live on Carl Avenue. A house is about to be completed. If it isn't a new house from scratch, I forget the word that Mr. Leuthold used, chipped away or whatever it was, scraped away, that's what it was. Well, this 1950s real Monte Sereno, probably before the rear admiral founded the city, that was there, that was scraped away, and you have what is essentially a Mac mansion on steroids. We don't propose to do that. We have 1.35 acres. We'd like to split it roughly in 0.75 acres and 0.6 acres, depending. but plus or minus. The smaller portion of the property we built a new house on. It currently is an old riding arena and dilapidated stables. It needs to go. And I cannot see that us taking down a dilapidated stables, which is visible from Carl Avenue if you look closely. My two sons ensured that it is dilapidated. Taking that down and building a modern one-story, low key to the ground, 2,400 plus or minus square foot home is a detriment to Monte Sereno. It certainly is not. And then finally, I'd just like to say that we will not do an ADU. We were going to do an ADU, but this meets our needs. And if this ordinance is sidetracked or not implemented, we won't do an ADU. We'll sit and wait until another council inevitably changes it and goes to the state standards. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Anybody else who wishes to address council? The answer is no, nobody else?
No, actually there are two hands just came up. Tony Jeans.
Yeah, for some reason I can't see any hands, so thank you for keeping track. Mr. Jeans, please go ahead.
Can I possibly share my screen?
Of course. If you could help him share his screen, please.
Yes, give me one moment.
So we've been going for about 3 hours. Do you guys want to take a break for about 5 minutes?
Mr. Jean, you should be able to.
I'm trying. I hit the share screen and it will stop other people's screen sharing. Do I want
That's
to
fine. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying continue. Okay, so I would, first of all, as I mentioned in a letter that I wrote, I am 95% behind staff's recommendations. I think they are exceptionally well considered. I want to throw out a couple of thoughts to you to increase the privacy that is going to result with the one-story homes that are going to be coming through SB9, because that is all that is going to be allowed. I want to clarify the discretionary alternative, and then I'll talk about affordable housing. So the items in red are things that I've changed a little bit. The rest are part of the staff report. So change number one at the top is, I do not believe that we should go straight in and allow 3,300, 4,950, and 6,600 square feet. That was brought up, I believe, by Councilmember Lawler. If not, then it was one of the other council members, I forget. I think that would be appropriate. That is the standard that is allowed on any lot. And you only get a bigger square footage if you go one story. So I would like to consider this 10% increase in square footage only if the house conforms with applicable zoning standards. So if you want to move it away from the property line and not have a 4-foot setback and have true garage parking, etc., then you should be allowed your 3,300, 4,950. So that's a possible thing that you may want to consider. I'm just commenting on the single story that mimics Saratoga. And I'm going to comment on the discretionary review. Mostly you won't want to use discretionary review, but if you want to do a nice 2-story home, then you would come back to site and architecture after the urban lot split, go to the committee, go to the homeowners and neighbors, etc., and you'd have to adhere to Monte Sereno design guidelines. And then finally, this is a consideration for you to think about. This is a Los Gatos ordinance. And what it said is, when you do an SB9 lot split, if you want to build a house on it, you also have to build an ADU size unit. You must build it then. It must be part of what you are doing. So you will then, for every SB9 split, get at least one affordable ADU size unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. And thank you for your contribution. Anyone else wish to address council?
Yes, Trevor.
There, the infamous unmute button. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name's Trevor Schwartz. I'm a homeowner in the area, and I'm in support of SB9, and I appreciate staff's review and updated recommendations in regards to it. I'm not necessarily in the camp that I think everybody within Monte Sereno is intending on splitting their lot and selling off half their property. I think this is going to be applicable and make sense for a handful of residents in the area. The one question I have out there, or myth I want to just somebody can comment to, is there's been this notion of developers coming into town and buying lots and scraping them and redeveloping them and then moving on. It's my understanding that SB9 has some verbiage in place to try and discourage that type of activity. So maybe Sergio or someone could speak to that question on developers being able to come in and take advantage of this rule in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there is one handout. It's Mr. Walsh, but I'm assuming it's Mrs. Walsh who wants to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, who is this?
Thank you. This is Michelle Walsh.
Yes, Michelle.
Just a very quick question, two quick questions. One is the previous speaker. It's interesting that they ask an interesting question. It would be good to know the answer to those. I don't know if there's a way we go back and forth on those discussions, because I'd be interested in that answer. But secondarily, I'm curious, because I don't think it was ever came out in this meeting, why Vineland and Bicknell were primarily the targeted areas for a rezoning inventory. Can the council speak to how that came about and why we aren't opening this up to a bigger umbrella?
Yeah, that issue has been tabled, which means we're not discussing it. So it's almost as if it never was discussed until we put it back on the agenda.
Well, but can I just back at you? I appreciate that, but I have a concern about going forward. There was a directive there that somehow, and it's fine. If it's done, we'll never see it again, but I'd like some reassurance from the council that we're going down a completely different path and we won't go back on a fishing hunt for looking for possibilities to satisfy the state requirement.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the matters that are on the agenda, we discuss. That matter is not on the agenda, and there's no way anybody can give any guarantees as to what else will come up next. But hope, because we're still in this process. So make sure you are on our email list and you get all the information. And if you see it up again, you can come and knock our heads off or something else. But at this point, we've tabled it, and I think it might have been partially because of comments that came in from the staff, from you and others. Let's see. There was a question that was asked by Mr. Schwartz as to the SB9 verbiage to discourage activity. Attorney Rudin, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me just pull up the statute so I'm not misquoting it. There's a couple provisions that are relevant. One is the requirement that the submission of the affidavit by the homeowner indicating that they intend to remain on one of the properties that is developed for a period of at least 3 years. Additionally, with respect to urban lot splits, let me find that other language. One of the requirements is that neither the owner of the parcel being subdivided nor any person acting in concert with the owner has previously subdivided an adjacent parcel. So people, in theory, shouldn't be able to go down and, buy up parcels and split them in a row. But given that the purpose of SB9 is to develop, more dwelling units, the restrictions are not particularly, robust, let's put it that way. But there are some protections, particularly the affidavit requirement.
All right. I guess the issue is there's an affidavit requirement, but if somebody gives an affidavit and then goes ahead and sells it to a developer, there's no prescribed penalties, as I understand it, in the law, and that's why people think that it may not be something that will be very, very enforceable. Any other individuals from the public line who should address the council? Okay. Seeing none, let's go on.
There is actually one other hand that came up, Skip Pearson.
Go ahead. Skip.
I have a further question on Councilmember Lawler's question as to square footage. As I just seem to read the suggestion from that everyone's looking at right now, they're talking evidently about 3,000 square feet or 4,500 square feet for a 20,000 square foot lot, or 6,000 plus for a acre lot. And as I understand it, Councilmember Lawler asked whether that square footage includes accessory dwelling units. So my question is, if you wanted to maximize the square footage on a 20,000 square foot lot created under SB9, does that mean you would have roughly, on a 20,000 square foot lot, the maximum would be roughly at 3,000 square feet and 1,500 square feet of a large ADU and a mini ADU? So 4,500 total square footage, and you have maybe a 1,200 square foot ADU and a 300 or 400 square foot mini ADU. Does that mean your house could be a maximum of 3,000 square feet?
And you care to answer that?
Yes, thank you. So under the current regulations, and something that we're not recommending to change, is that if a lot is split under the SB9 provisions, basically only 2 units would be allowed on the new lots. So you would not be able to do a main house, an ADU, and a JADU on lots created through the urban lot split. So you would be limited to 2. On SB9 projects that are not an urban lot split, under the current regulations, you would be able to build an additional 800 square foot unit. And then sort of up for discussion tonight would be what if that square footage should be increased, again, for the non-urban lot splits.
Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. I know it's a little confusing, and we'll probably have to muddle through it as we move along. Anyone else on the public line?
There are no other hands.
Okay, good. Thank you for all your comments. Those are very helpful.
There is a hand that just came up. I'm sorry, Paul Crolla.
All right. All right, Crolla.
Paul, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now we can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to comment very, very briefly that it seemed like not too long ago, the direction on the SB9 stuff was to not let structures exceed, I think it was 750 square feet or something. And I just want to comment, I thought that was very impractical. I can't imagine people would purchase a lot that had been subdivided and only be allowed to put a 750 square foot home on it. So my big thing, I think, is for subdivisions, I think that the area that you should be allowed to build for the house should be commensurate with the size of the lot that's been subdivided. And I kind of get the impression that's the direction you're headed, although I'm not certain about that. But anyhow, I would be very keen to make sure that we don't propagate lots of little 750 square foot Lego brick houses, but, you know, build a decent home. I don't know, what was 2,000-3,000 square feet. But anyhow, that's just a comment I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments? Last call. All right, I guess we'll bring it back to council and have our discussion on everything that's been addressed. And who wants to go first on that? Councilor Luthol, please.
Thanks. I didn't really want to go first, but I did want to jump in and get several issues addressed here. So number one, an earlier comment had been glossed over and never, I don't believe, clearly answered. And I just wanted to stress, we've touched on the concept of junior ADUs. And I just wanted to mention that for housing element purposes, junior ADUs don't count for anything. We're required to allow them under the various objective review standards and over the counter and all of that when they're compliant, similar to ADUs. So, but I did want to put that out there. They don't help us for our numbers or for our income guidelines, although they might help in real life with the income issues. So I put that out there first. The issue Mr. Pearson brought up, I'm going to go kind of backwards order around my notes here, which was a discussion about the ADU and the house and the sizes, back to Ms. Lawler's comment earlier. And I think this is something that we're going to have to look at really carefully as we develop with the staff our final version of any changes, if the changes are to be made. And I think that comes to what was mentioned about Los Gatos requiring the ADU, because I think we will get an unintended consequence here if we have an SB9 change and then we say, well, you can build to this size, but you can't build an ADU. Legal and Ms. Perkins can work together on that as we go forward. But I think that's why Los Gatos is requiring you to build the ADU, because you can't not allow the ADU. You can't say, we'll let you do the lot split and we'll let you build this size, but you'll never be able to build the ADU. So I want to make sure we investigate that further. And in fact, not just for housing getting twice as much, but also I think it's the way to make sure that there are no unintended consequences coming out of that. Mr. Walsh's comment, which I've written down and summarized as watch out for unintended consequences, especially with the over-the-counter review of things. I really want to keep that in mind as we go forward and build any of these documents and final versions of things, because whatever is under the objective standards, we'll never see. The neighbors will see it. Everyone in the community will see it. And just like I think Mr. Walsh was probably alluding to, the ADU issue, ADUs were passed for over-the-counter review permitting 4 feet from the lot line and 16 feet high. And several homeowners in our community were very surprised when suddenly, with no story poles and no review and no advance notice, that was built 4 feet from their lot line by their neighbors who didn't care about their relationships, as opposed to the ones who come over and work closely with neighbors, as we all dream our neighbors will do. And we all think that we will aspire to do ourselves. So watch out as we go forward. I really want to underline this. Watch out for the unintended consequences, and watch out for the invitation to deceive us. And I think that's one of the things we're getting at as we talked about the affidavit. We talked about this in prior meetings. The affidavit is an invitation to lie to us. All the homeowner has to do is say, I do intend to occupy one of these units, and then they build it and then they go away and we never see them again. It's just like every developer who comes before us says, I want to build my dream home, please let me build this home. And then sure enough, as soon as it's finished, it's on the market and they're gone. So I say that certainly we have people who are not that way in our community, but we have developers who will lie to our faces, and we've seen it over and over. So the way to do that is to make sure we draft these documents very carefully, and we have enforcement and code enforcement along the way. The one other issue I want to raise, because Mr. Jeans has brought it up and staff has brought up the possibility for us to consider the idea that we have both the objective standards version and the discretionary review. And I think maybe Mr. White will be able to talk about this further from his perspective in site and architecture. But I think discretionary review creates a huge potential problem for us as we deal with SB9, because objective standards, we're never going to see it. It's going to come over the counter and suddenly it's going to be under construction and surprise the neighbors, and they're going to be upset at us that that happened. But discretionary review is where people come in and say, I actually want to build something, and here's how it's nice, and here's how 2 stories make sense. I'm taking this to site and architecture. But as soon as we have discretionary review, then it's not an objective standards issue anymore. And if we start approving one and not approving a similar thing on a different lot, we may very well be opening ourselves up to more SB9 litigation, I think, and I want to investigate this. If we start having discretionary review, have we potentially opened up ourselves to abuse of discretion the first time we deny somebody that they claim is similar to something else that we approved? So I want to watch that idea as we develop any changes to SB9. And then my last comment about this is certainly people have sensed in the community and these developers and some of the citizens who want to take advantage of this opportunity to do something perhaps nice to solve issues they have, are hearing that I'm generally against development and wanting to block it. That's not necessarily the case. I want to make sure that we move very slowly and get it right. And so I'm also concerned about us meeting our housing elements going forward. And as I said, my personal ADU plans are delayed so I can help this city meet its housing element. I'm not rushing to do an SB9 or an ADU right now because it doesn't do the city of Monte Sereno any good. And I love this city and I want to do the best for it. So I'm going to listen to all of the neighbors, including those who want to develop and those who will inevitably show up to oppose your plans. But I want to make sure we get an objective standards that people are not going to get to speak up about and never come before this council about, that we get it right. And that we don't let one person do what they want. And then 6 months later, they say, but my neighbor's building 4 feet from the lot line. I never thought that was going to happen. Oh my God, these are unintended consequences. So what's good for one lot is good for the next lot. Let's get it right for our 1,000 residences here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lawler, please go ahead.
Well, it certainly is hard to follow that. Let's see. I am intrigued by, I understand that folks, property owners that want to do this for their properties, and I'm sensitive to that. I'm also sensitive to the unintended consequences and making sure we do this right. So I like the idea of, just being very deliberate. I am intrigued by Mr. Jean's suggestion that the max building size be limited to what we would normally restrict to a second story. So 3,000, 4,500, 6,000 respectively, noting privacy concerns. And I'm intrigued by the the incentive for the 10% increase to require bigger setbacks than 4 feet, because my biggest problem is that 4-foot setback. I don't like that. I think that that's on a huge lot. Why would anybody go all the way to 4 feet from the fence line? But people do. So I think this sort of sets in motion a incentive to go bigger and have that setback increase. So I'm intrigued by that. And I'm also intrigued by requiring the ADU at the time of build. And if we tie the total square footage allowable on that lot to include the square footage for that ADU, then we're also creating a smaller overall structure and minimizing the impact of a McMansion type situation. So these are all things that are worth thinking of. And I really like how we're kind of diving into these specifics. I also wanted to bring up the good neighbor policy. Is there a way that we can recommend, or the reviewing of that, cite the good neighbor policy and all of this to make sure that our neighbors and everybody regarding an SB9 split is on board and involved? And that is my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else want to address council? Mayor Pro Tem Mekachuk, please go ahead.
I concur with the comments made by the prior 2 council members in terms of we've got to get this right, and we have to do something to make it more attractive that provided an incentive or less of a disincentive to do a SB9 lot split. I think that we need to know our numbers a little better before we open the throttle, if you will, and relax the standards too much. And I think it's easier to go a little slower and then accelerate than all of a sudden to have gone too fast. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what did we do? So I kind of like that. And I think that Mr. Jeans had some very good and insightful comments. So I concur with Councilmember Lawler on that. I'll say it again, it's easier to allow more, to relax restrictions rather than tightening up the restrictions. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner.
Yes, I just wanted to make a few comments here. I think one of the things that we really need to do is to really understand the ramifications of SB9. And because SB9 is brand new, we don't really know what's going to happen if we grant an SB9 construction, right? It's supposed to be ministerial. So at this point in time, even HCD is saying, we don't, because SB9 is new, we don't want to really include it yet in the housing element. So I think going slow at this point in time is something that I would advocate. And let's see how other cities are doing it. Let's look at SCAG and see how SB9 is really functioning for other cities. So that's my point of view.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? This may end up going to the site and architecture. So Chair White, if you would like to comment on it.
Thank you. I echo all the comments of the council members about going slow. I mean, that's the reason I asked the question, what's the motivation for this discussion tonight? Is it the 5 homeowners that want to do this? There are 1,200 other households in our community that we should be hearing from. And so that's why I really appreciate Council Member Mekanchuk's encouragement to do surveys. And I think that survey should include questions not only about some of the RENA numbers, but also how we're going to implement SB9 and how people feel about that. It'd be great to have a good neighbor policy. And it's one of the very first things we do when we entertain applications at the Site and Architecture Commission is they got an objecting neighbor and we're going to say, why didn't you guys work this out? It's not our job to do that for you. But I don't know that ministerially we can do that in SB9. So I think a lot more groundwork is going to be needed. Going slow is probably going to be the best way to approach it. And we may be back 3 months from now working on something different, some creative idea that some other municipality has employed that works. But I don't think we should rush to allowing people to just simply create giant lots, or I'm sorry, giant McMansions on lots, and hopefully we don't do that. So any advice from the council members about some direction at the next Site and Architecture Commission, because I assume this is going to be dropped in our lap to develop, would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Here comes Commissioner Sharma.
I just wanted to say, like, I completely concur with Chair White and Council Member Turner and the other council members that said the same thing. I'm completely in favor of getting, the outreach, getting the feedback, more feedback from our community, and just going slow. I do understand the sentiments of the residents that came and spoke today. But as Chair White pointed out, they're, that they represent about 5 households, and we have a much larger community. So in the interest of reflecting everybody, the entire community, I think that the idea behind going slow is probably the best course of action, for us. And at the same time, I also agree with Council Member Turner in looking to see what other communities, other cities are doing, and nothing wrong with that either. Let's see how they implement this. And see what we can adopt for our community. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, Luthold.
Thank you. I actually wanted to mention something that these comments after me have brought up, and that is looking at other communities. I recall reading an article about a month ago that was about Sb9 and Sb9 applications, and it said that San Jose has not received a single one. So talking about unintended consequences, we have 5 people in Monte Sereno who would love Sb9 to be relaxed and it would solve their problems. And we, the council, are looking at that and trying to figure out how to do that right for our community. And get it right. But it's really interesting that the state passed this in order to allow small and affordable houses and these lots to split and people to really create new housing. And what we're talking about is creating $2 million, $3 million lot split homes, which is fine. That's what is right for our community. And once we find the right mix for that, it's very likely that that's going to happen here. And I would just ask those homeowners and their associated developers to continue to work with us so that we can be very careful and very conscious and get this done right for the community. And it looks like it's going to happen, but it's at the same time, it's very ironic that not a single one in San Jose actually happening right now. So that's where we stand today. So I'm for, and I really appreciate what staff and Mr. Jeans and the other homeowners have helped lay out here, because I think it puts a lot of really good information before us about what would actually work for the homeowners in our community. And then the comments that the commissioners have added about what about everyone else. And that's really what I was underlining with being very careful, because ministerial approval and 4-foot lot lines is frustrating to homeowners and is really going to be problematic for people. I'm shocked by, and I know Lon Allen's, ex-Mayor Allen sent in comments about this, about fire danger and evacuation, and as that relates to both housing element and Sb9. I can't imagine that a 4-foot lot line against a 4-foot lot line with 8 feet between houses, with fences and landscaping there, is truly safe for firefighting. And I don't know why the state put that 4-foot limit, except that they wanted this to work on very small lots. And so I think Councilmember Lawler and others have brought this up, and Mr. Jeans as well. If we can create an incentive to create proper lot lines and build that into this and get these people so that nobody builds, and nobody should be building at 4 feet. if we can find a way to make that happen in real life so that people move away from the lot lines, it's going to be a safety issue as well as a privacy issue and a rural character issue. So that's where I'm at the moment. So I appreciate what's been done. My thought is to go slowly and continue to develop this, but to assure people that we're going to continue to work on it. So I don't think we need to necessarily make a lot of changes, but we need it to keep coming up on the agenda.
All right. Any other comments? All right. So look, based on the discussion, it looks like you want to go slow on it. I'd like to give some guidelines, and maybe the next step would be to get whatever guidelines and polling data can be accumulated to present something to the Site and Architecture Committee for their review, rather than have it keep coming back to us, because that'll be, I don't think we want to slow it down to a turtle race. So if you look at the alternatives that the staff recommended, it may be worth discussing each of them separately to provide some guidelines. The first one was revise the maximum building size to equal the allowable maximum building size of a one-story building. And staff had based on the square footage as to what the size would be. And the thought was that there should be some incentive given for people who comply with our regular building setback requirements. So rather than have a 3,600 foot house, it'd be a 3,000 or maybe a 2,400 house, or maybe it'll be a 1,200 ADU, and the rest of the allowable footage would be used for the balance of the house. And then an extra 10% incentive if they agree to comply with all the state requirements for our regular setback requirements. The staff said that they should remove the size limit of coverage porches. So we need to discuss whether we want to remove that. Remove the impervious coverage. The impervious, again, that is something we should probably should provide some guidelines on that. And then the third one finally was to remove the 800 square foot size limit that we're proposing. And that's really the whole thing, as to what that size limit should be, and whether we want to go by the lot size for the size limit, or whether you want to say do a 1,200 and the balance of the whatever is allowable in the lot or not. So I would encourage us to have a little bit more specific guidelines for our SNA, so it goes to them next. They have some idea, and obviously the Site and Architecture commissioners can also participate in that discussion. So that was one of their things, and I think staff was hoping we would draft the ordinance and then send it to amendment, but that's not happening. So I think we are on alternative number 2, which is direct staff to prepare a draft ordinance to revise the Muni Code based on standards as deemed necessary. So I think we've had some discussion on what standards may work. And the third was to take no action. So my thought was, if we can get it a little bit closer to the finish line, rather than leave it as let's find out what's going on and then come back, it may be more helpful that we are moving in some direction. So I'll appreciate some comments on that. Mayor Pro Tem Mekichuk.
I think that our first agenda item tonight, we looked at a project schedule that has May 24th and then going up to August the 15th, submitted draft housing element for HCD for review. And I thought that we directed staff to undertake a survey and see what the interest in the ADUs are, so that we had that explicitly. And that may bring us a lot closer to our 193 units. Plus we need some cushion. So I think we have to see where we're going on that. The survey has to be completed in June. No one's going to be doing well. And so we've got it there to understand so that we can then take action perhaps in August on putting something in a change in the regulations, so that we can start to move forward and make sure that we meet our numbers. And I believe that we should be complying with the HCD numbers, that we shouldn't try to be fighting that. It is going to be what it's going to be, and how are we going to get there? So my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Luther.
Thank you. Mayor, you brought up an interesting item that we had neglected, and I'm hoping Site and Architecture will be able to either carry this forward for us to the next level or get some more guidance from us along this. Our city attorney may want to speak to this as well. I recall that when SB9 came along, certainly on the minimum sizes, it said that we could not mess with the impervious surface requirements. We couldn't, our objective standards could not use impervious surface requirements to go below the minimum of what was allowed by SB9. But I want to bring up the impervious surface requirements issue to suggest that we may want to be very aggressive on trying to maintain the very highest level as close as possible to what the state guidelines were on impervious surface, because we're in the middle of a drought and we have a serious water recharge issue in Santa Clara County specifically. And every inch of impervious surface is a problem for water recharge. So my feeling, environmentally speaking, is that we need to really push the limits of keeping as close to our rules on impervious surface as possible without making it impossible to build. So I think we want to look at that. We want to look at that very carefully. And my suggestion would be to ask staff and Site and Architecture as we go forward to maintain impervious surface as much as possible while allowing people to build what's necessary. So my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm glad you picked that up. Appreciate that. Chair White, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry not to delay this meeting any longer, but I would be interested, and I would appreciate the opportunity for the Site and Architecture to actually submit some questions as part of this survey that may be going out in relationship to SB9. Perhaps we can have that agendized for our next meeting and deliver those. They can be approved by the council and modified as they see fit. But it'll give us some good idea. And at the same time we're doing that, work on some considered alternatives to the statute so that we're double tracking those and we're not delaying things. But we're moving slowly enough and carefully enough that we know exactly what the feedback is going to be by the time we actually have a draft before the city council that we've approved. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's important that we keep moving forward, even there may be small steps, but as long as they're in the direction where we can figure out what needs to be done. Mayor Pro Tem Makachek, please.
Thanks. Chair White, I don't think that City Council needs to look at your recommendations for the survey. I mean, you're Site and Architectural Commission, so whatever recommendations you have, questions, whatever, I would say run with it, work with staff, and away you go. The other thing I wanted to circle back to impervious coverage and what's going on with impervious coverage anyways is you've got to keep your water runoff on your own property. You can't be sending it off your site anymore. So impervious coverage is kind of one way to do that, but the other regulations are tightening it up so that you've got to keep your water on site. So if you relax your impervious coverage, you still have to keep it on site. So it doesn't really matter. That has evolved over the years. Plus the technology for keeping your water on site has increased. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments? Everybody probably wants to go home by now. So let's see if somebody can wrap all this discussion up as to what direction we're giving staff on this one. Mr. Councilor Luthol, I think you're probably the right person to get started on that.
Sure, thanks. Well, one thing that I was actually questioning whether I wanted to raise my hand on this, but I think it relates to what you're saying about wrapping this up as well. And that is, I think we need to prepare a little bit of a primer because we're all fluent, reasonably fluent. We're all learning as we go. We're trying to study this. We're figuring this out. We appreciate the help of everyone who's helping us legally and from the homeowners and developers' point of view. But I think we need to prepare a primer so that when we go out and ask questions, it's easy to say, are you interested in an ADU? But if you say, you know, what do you think about SB9 and setbacks? And should there be a multiplier or a incentive if the setbacks are greater? People are going to, their eyes are going to glaze over and they say, what's SB9? And so I think we need to reach out and really prepare that primer and have a few more answers as we survey people. And if it's possible to help educate people with some of these other questions. Ms. Turner brought up a really interesting one that I had never thought about, which is how does this affect the Prop 13 values and when do the assessments occur? If we have good information that is reliable that we can share with our citizens, let's do that. If we're not sure or want to be extra careful, then let's be very careful about it. But let's make sure people understand that their neighbor could get a ministerial approval and have a construction going on next to them, and what would they think was appropriate and fair in terms of limitations on that versus coming before site and architecture and so forth. So if we can prepare some sort of a primer on this, that would be great. I think in terms of summarizing, what we're asking is to reach out to the community as part of the ADU survey that we talked about earlier, to talk about SB9, to make sure the community knows what SB9 is and what kind of changes are being requested by some of the people in the city, and that we get everybody's knowledge and feedback. We had people on Bicknell shocked that they were up for consideration. And this is something that we see all the time as council, where people say, how come I didn't get notice until after the fact or on the eve of this when a neighbor knocked on my door and told me about it? And yes, I mean, we all were elected. This entire council is really dedicated to transparency and getting the information out. I know our city staff has got that message, and yet it is a tough thing to do. So postcards, flyers, and literally knocking on doors. I think we talked about that. Can we make sure that every citizen of Monte Sereno is aware of what we're doing on housing and what we're doing and considering on SB9? So that they don't come back and say, how come you voted on SB9 and we never heard about it? Part of it's going to be outreach on Nextdoor. Part of it's going to be some other forms of outreach. And this is something that we may need to bring up on the city council agenda. We need to talk with staff about this. Do we need to budget for some door-to-door? Or is this within the city's budget? Do we need to hire some people to make sure the outreach is effective this time? Because this is probably the most important issue we're facing for the next 8 years. So back to what the mayor brought up, which is summarizing. I think what we said was, we're very interested in this. We want to move slowly, do it right. We want site and architecture to spearhead surveying. We want to combine that with the ADU survey. And we do want to dual track this and keep it moving forward. So did I do a good job of that? Other people have comments?
So just to sort of get clarification on that, you know, assuming that the council and the commission want to move this effort forward in terms of making any sort of revisions to the SB9 regulations the city has in place, you know, any changes you would like to make at all, basically, we're looking at a 60 to 90 day lead time, which puts us basically at around the same time as the completion of the housing element. Doing nothing in terms of surveys, doing nothing in terms of like additional community feedback other than at the public meetings where, you know, we're going to be discussing potential revisions to the draft regulations of the Site and Architecture Commission. Site and Architecture Commission is going to, you know, provide their feedback. You know, there'll be refinement to the ordinance. Then we bring it to council. The council would have 2 readings of an ordinance, and then we would, you know, the public obviously would have the opportunity to participate, discuss, provide commentary during those as well. So there is going to be a fair amount of public input, but if folks want to move this forward, this, you know, before the housing element and consider this as part of the housing element, this is something that, you know, basically I think the planner would need to, you know, be bringing to either the meeting in June for Site and Architecture Commission or probably no later than July. So realistically, you know, the staff recommendation includes, you know, the bullet points that you actually see right there on your screen. So if there are specific feedback, either the council or the commission wants to give at this time on those bullet points, that would be particularly appreciated.
All right. I'd like to hear from our city manager also, Mr. Leonardes, if you'd like to give some your insights.
Thank you, Mayor. No, very good discussion. Staff has plenty of direction this evening, and we will carry forth with all the recommendations that have been made by the council and the Site and Art Commission.
All right. Thank you for that. Councilmember Luto.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to suggest almost, I mean, at a bare minimum, and I'm suggesting that it should be a lot more than this. And I need city staff and Site and Architecture and all to jump in and make it happen. And if necessary, get budget from us. These bullet points, as the city attorney pointed out, I think these should be out on a postcard to every citizen at a bare minimum that says urgent, call to action. The city is considering these things. Talk to your Site and Architecture, talk to your city council, get back to us, because publishing the agenda is just not doing the trick. And like I say, this is one of the most important things we're going to do. So I remember trying to design my election flyer to get attention. We sent out the See-Click Fix postcard for please sign up for See-Click Fix and Fix at Monte Sereno. And we get some responses on that, and we're in the middle of an election cycle with a lot of junk mail, but we need to get this published. I don't want people coming to us after we do it saying, you know, you never told us about it. And we say, yeah, but we did. We told you 6 times and we had 3 meetings about it. I want them to know that we're having the meetings about this and that their input is needed. And if they don't do it, we're making decisions without their input. So I'm suggesting that really publicity is job 1 for the city staff, and help us, help you, help us, so that we don't get beat up about this after the fact, as we always do. And I'm guilty of that too. Like I say, I came to the city council because it was 2 days before the meeting and the neighbor knocked on my door and said, have you seen the flyer about the 300-foot neighbors? And I said, what? And we got involved. So let's not do that. Let's make this all about outreach and all about overdoing the outreach and get it done. So that's my suggestion here, is that we really double down on it and not just do our jobs, but do our jobs and be proud of it, and make sure that every citizen has no excuse for we didn't let them know that this is going on.
Thank you for that. And City Manager Leonardes, there's a lot being placed on your shoulders, I guess, as to do the outreach and everything else. Is that something that's accomplishable in a reasonable amount of time, or do you need any more resources from us or any other budget from us?
Well, I mean, we could send out postcards. We can drop a flyer on everyone's porch. We can do a lot of e-blasts and those kinds of things. whether the people come or not, or whether they will accuse the council of, they didn't hear about it or not, that will be determined in the future. But we will do our best to communicate the message to the public about this very important housing element, SB9, all the things discussed this evening.
Yeah, so I guess the question is also, obviously we want everybody to know this is going on, but we also wanted feedback as to what they would like to get done. So that'll be your challenge to see how you can get it done, and how soon do you think something like that can be put together? So this is like a whole election campaign, I guess.
Yeah, I think probably a good approach would be just to see what other cities are doing to try to engage the public. What's the most effective way to do it? So we will have to do a little research.
Well, the initial thing is just to go ahead and do what, make contact with citizens. Whether other citizens are doing it or not, I think we need to do that anyway, right? And get out there and knock on doors or get flyers out. And I don't know if you need to hire more people or hire a consultant to put that together. So, and I don't expect you to give me an answer right now. Obviously you need to think through that. But SB9 has been around for almost 6-7 months, so we need to move it forward. So we're not accused of not taking care of things or doing something that's not appropriate under SB9. So it's important to get it done and get it done right, but also we need to move forward with it. So if you need any resources from us, please let us know. If you want us to go with you to knock on doors, maybe we can do that. I guess the campaigns are going to be over on June 7th. So I guess right after that, postcards may receive some attention. Okay, let's see. Commissioner Sharma, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lahi. I think just listening to the city lawyer and also to Councilmember Luthold, I think that part of the outreach, it might help speed up if we do have that primer ready, like a FAQ of what does this mean for me and what are the specific things, and just like the like the simple question and the frequently asked questions and answers. I think if somehow the postcard or the outreach could direct the citizens to go and look that information up, it'll answer a lot of their questions. And so they might be more, it might just reduce some cycles and getting some initial feedback. That's all I was going to say. And then the second thing was, if there is in the interest of time, and I don't know how it was done before in the city, but maybe even appointing some of us in the site and architecture to form a task force to go sort of form this outreach program in the short term, so we can facilitate quick feedback. That might be a great idea, and I'd be up for volunteering for that as well.
That's wonderful. I think that's what it'll take, is to have us being directly involved. Excellent. And Mayor Pro Tem Maklichuk?
I heard what Councilmember Luthold was saying, and for me, the easy way to understand things is with a little case study or an example. So, you live in an R18. Here's what you could do. Here's what the unknowns are with respect to Prop 13. But having some examples for an R18, an R120, and an R144 would be really helpful. And the diagrams that were put together by the people presenting tonight, that was very helpful in me understanding it. But we need that in light of what the alternatives are, and I give that to staff. Oh, and my other point will be that it would be very good to hear to have staff report as an agenda item at our next council meeting, what the steps are going forward, so that we understand the pace and what's being done.
Thank you. Chair White?
I echo Commissioner Sharma's suggestion that we have a task force, and maybe some of us commissioners can speak outside of this meeting and do that. I think that to Council Member Luthold's point, we need a primer. If we're going, we need to educate our citizens about what SB9's consequences, and as Council Member Luthold said, unintended consequences could be. And it should be very brief because nobody's going to read more than 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then ask them the very questions about these 5 points that staff has recommended we consider in terms of amendments to this SB9 statute for our community, and see if people would support them or not. I think we should, if we keep it simple, we're going to get some feedback right away, and then we can take steps in relationship to these suggestions by staff. That's my thoughts on it.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments? So Attorney Rudin, are we getting close to maybe setting up an ad hoc committee to do the primer and to do the task force, which would be composed of Councilmember Luthold and Commissioner Sharma, and I don't know if Commissioner Chair White volunteered for it also or not. Would that be appropriate to do? Attorney Rudin, that's for you.
I'll defer to planning staff and the city manager as to, you know, whether or not they think that an ad hoc committee would be specifically useful, particularly on issues of outreach or preparing supplemental materials.
Okay. Yeah, so that's basically what they would be doing. So City Manager Leonatus, please give us your input on that. Or planning, or Diane, either one of you. Or both of you, I guess.
So regarding the volunteers proposal by the Site and Architecture Commission, maybe we could divide the city into 5 areas and drop a flyer on everybody's porch, have them, you know, help deliver the flyers. That would probably be the most effective way to get the message out there. As was mentioned earlier, lots of stuff like postcards get mixed in with the junk mail and tossed out. People don't pay attention to it. But if somebody drops a bright yellow flyer on your porch with 3 paragraphs about SB9, in person delivered, and they have to bend over and pick it up, I think that could be probably the best way to get the message out there. So if we can get volunteers to help with that, that would be great. We can get one to everybody's house.
Okay, that sounds good. But we also need somebody to prepare the primer. So the ad hoc committee I was thinking about is between Councilmember Luthold and Commissioner Sharma, and if Chair White wants to jump in, and I suppose we could add more people to that. So if anybody else wants to jump in on that also, now is a good time to think about it. Mayor Pro Tem Makachek, did you raise your hand, or was that just a?
Yes, if we could have 2 council members and 2 SNA members, or then I think we wouldn't violate the Brown Act, and we could have an ad hoc committee. That's a question for Attorney Rudin.
Mr. Rudin.
I think that's fine. I'm just not sure exactly what it is that the ad hoc committee would do. I'm assuming the flyer would just state the bullet points that are presented here on the staff report and explain exactly, you know, that the city's committee, you know, is anticipating consideration of a draft ordinance, and invite people to, you know, appear at meetings that are scheduled and, you know, mentioned on the flyer. Steve, did you have some particular thoughts about what the ad hoc committee would do in this? Or Diana?
One thought I had is where I do think an ad hoc committee would be helpful to get direction from the council and commissioners a little quicker than on the regular public hearing schedule. So I think the process could probably move a little bit faster if we had an ad hoc committee with some direct, you know, and more frequent meetings and feedback.
Okay.
I'll volunteer for city council with Council Member Luthold.
And Councilor Luther.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I believe, and city attorney can comment on this. I think we need, for ad hoc committees, I think that has to be an agenda item. And so I think we need that to come up on the next agenda for site and architecture to be formally approved and for city council. And if I'm not correct about that and we can move more quickly, that's great. But if we have to bring it up on agenda, it sounds like we've got it on agenda. The other comment is, I think we're talking about a little more than just the bullet points. We're talking about preparing some primers of what is SB9 and why does this matter to you? That may be something that's linked from the bright orange flyer that goes on people's steps that says the council is considering these things. Please go to this website. But I think we do need to work with staff and legal counsel and make sure that we prepare the what the heck is SB9 anyway, and why do you care about it? So, but if we need to formalize the ad hoc committee in the next meetings, then let's do that. And I am willing to be drafted for that and work with Councilmember Mekachek, but I think that may be something that we need a public meeting about.
Attorney Rudin, do we need an agenda item on that, or can we call it something other than an ad hoc?
That's typically best practice, and we can put it on the consent calendar for each body.
All right, let's do that, and I suppose you guys can informally work and get it started.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, as long as staff, are working with, less than a quorum of each body, they can solicit feedback on proposed regulations. So there's also that.
Yeah, so I suggest since this thing is still fresh, it might be easier to keep going. The Premier really is answering the FAQs and doing other things, and also the staffs, they've been working very, very hard, and they've come up with a whole bunch of recommendations and everything else, and they're probably looking for an up and down vote on those things, but we're saying we need more work on it, and it'd be easier for them to see get the direct input as they continue to work on it, so they're not working in a vacuum. So that'll be great. I think that's probably a good result. So at this point, the direction is to informally prepare the FAQs, Premier, and make it to every door in Monte Sereno as much as possible. There's about 1,200 houses, so there's 4 of you, that's 300 houses each, I guess. And we can also, the rest of us can also join in. I'm thinking, for instance, from going in and talking to people. All right, is that a fair summary of what we're trying to accomplish? Okay, does that give the staff what they need, or do we need to have some further discussion on this?
I think that the direction is clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your effort, and I hope you don't feel like you didn't get your up and downward, but this is a very serious topic, and you've done a lot of great work. Mr. Linares, your staff and you are doing good work on it. So we're trying to get more specific on it so we can get a better result for each and every citizen of Monte Sereno, which we can't accomplish, obviously. There's going to be some unhappy people, but at least we can try. Thank you for the, let's see, do we have anything else on the agenda? We don't. So thank you, Chair White, and the rest of the SNA for being here and moving this along. You guys are going to do your thing, get your FAQs, and then it'll be on the SNA's agenda to give us something that the City Council can look at. Excellent, sir. Madam, thank you so much. And I guess with that, we'll adjourn, unless somebody has any last minute comments. All right, great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Bye. And we did better than another attorney meeting that Attorney Rudin attended yesterday. I think they went till 11 o'clock on this, I hear. So thank you. Bye.